All right, how's it going, everyone? I've been kind of working on this online chat room built with Next.js, Prisma. I'm using the T3 stack, so Tailwind for styling. And I wanted to kind of show you what I'm going to build in this video. This is a live coding video, so everything I'm doing was just like off the top of my head, stream of consciousness to you all. And there's a lot of bugs that I run into while making this video, and I think if you're a beginner, it might be useful watching someone try to build out this application. Yeah, let me just kind of show you what we're building. Basically, we have an online chat room where you can create a new room. Like I can say like my awesome room. I already have a bug down here. Let's go ahead and create this room, and I'll select it. And what I can do is I can type in some messages like, what is up? How are you doing? And behind the scenes, this is actually connecting to a service called Agora RTM, which is handling all of the live messages in the chat room, right? So as I type in, those are being broadcasted and sent to anyone else who happens to be in the room. Now, if I go over to another tab and I log in as another user and click on that same room, I have the messages also persisting to a local database using Prisma, and you can see those messages show up here. And this user who I'm logged in as, Jane, can also send a message like, what is up, Bob? And if I go back to the Bob tab, you will see that the message, it's a little bit out of order. I need to kind of fix that. But you see that the message showed up. And every message or every chat room has its own history and its own like ability to have multiple users in the room. So as users come and go from rooms, you will see them pop up on the right or leave based on like who's in the room, right? So Bob just left this room that I'm in, and now he left from that little thing on the right. So if you're kind of interested in learning how to build this application with Next.js and also with the Agora RTM client setup, SDK setup, it's actually a pretty interesting learning experience. I ran into a lot of bugs. And by the way, I just noticed that this little panel on the right, my webcam was blocking it for the majority of this video. I apologize that you guys can't see this panel, but this is basically what it looks like. It's just as you change rooms, it tells you who's in the room or not. Okay, super basic. React component just shows you like the users in the room. But I think if you can visually see like what we're trying to build here, and you see it up front, you'll know like what we're trying to build later on in the tutorial. I apologize. I totally forgot my webcam's in the top right corner blocking this stuff. So yeah, give me a dislike for that one. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoy this. All right, so for this project, I'm going to be using something called the T3 stack, which is actually kind of coined by another YouTuber slash Twitch streamer, Theo. You can check him out, but really the only difference between the T3 stack with a lot of other stacks is it uses something called TRPC instead of REST. But for the most part, it uses Next, Tailwind, TypeScript, Prisma, and NextAuth, which I don't think we're going to be using NextAuth in this video. So to kind of get started with this project, I would recommend just running this command, npx create t3 app latest. And I'm going to go ahead and run it in my projects directory, and it's going to ask you a couple of questions. So I'm going to go ahead and say yes, go ahead and proceed, and then we're going to create one called Agora online chat room. Make sure you pick TypeScript. We want Prisma, we want Tailwind, we want TRPC. And I'm going to initialize a new Git repo. I'll say yes. Would you like to npm install? Yes. And by the way, I do plan to put all the code in this Agora online chat room Git repo when I'm kind of done with all this, so you can kind of check it out. I'll put the description in my YouTube link. And let me also make sure I open this. I don't think I have this open in my workspace. So I'm going to go to my projects. I'm going to go to that Agora online chat room and make sure I have it open in VS Code. And I am running Node version 18, I believe. So if you want to kind of follow along or kind of run the same project, you're going to have to do that. Let's do an npm run dev. Actually, before I do that, I think you do have to run an npx prisma migrate dev. So let me kind of walk you through what the T3 stack is real quick. It uses Next.js, so hopefully you're kind of familiar with Next.js. You have a file-based routing system where you can create files, and those files are going to be accessible in your URLs at the top, all right? And we'll kind of see that as we make new pages and stuff. But there's a lot of other stuff going on with this pre-made stack. You have Tailwind CSS, which is a cool library you can use to styling your applications. There is something called TRPC, which is automatically set up for us, which basically allows you to quickly write endpoints and have your front end and your back end share TypeScript types and interfaces. So it really kind of speeds up your development process. I'm not going to talk as to why I'm using TRPC over REST, but Honestly, it's just the communication layer between your front end and back end, and you can easily switch over to REST if you want to. So I don't think that should affect too much of this little live coding session. With the TRPC, how it works is there's a router, and inside that router folder, there is an index file which has all the what we call routes. So these are basically endpoints that you can call. You can run queries and you can run mutations against different endpoints to either, do a post request to the backend or do a GET request to retrieve data. And we will see that as well. So don't feel overwhelmed if you don't know anything about TRPC, because it's actually really easy to get going. And then we're using Prisma. So Prisma is kind of like an ORM where you define your schema here in this Prisma file, and you can define data models, and you can kind of run a single command to create your migration scripts, which will run against a local running SQLite database. So I'm going to go ahead and show you that. If you read the README, I do believe they tell you how to get started, which they say you should do a npx prisma migrate, I believe. Maybe it's not in the README, but it did print out in the command down here. So I'm going to say npx prisma migrate dev. And that's basically going to take this file where we defined all of our Prisma schemas, and it's going to put it in a SQLite database. So when I run this, you'll see a bunch of, not a bunch, you'll see a migration folder get created, and it's going to create a script, which I'll just say like init. And it's also going to create my SQLite database in my journal. And in here, you can go in and see like, what is this migration script doing? It's just creating a new table with a single ID column. Prisma is really cool because like you don't have to worry about writing any migration scripts yourself. It just does it for you. And as you add or remove columns or add or remove tables, it just automatically figures it out. I think Django does something very similar with their ORM, so it's really, really useful. Anyway, let's just see if we can run this. So npm run dev is how you run at the T3 stack. Also, it's how you run next, because T3 stack is just next. And now we're good to go. We got an application that's running. And that was kind of the setup. So what I want to show you next, or what I want to talk about, is what are we going to build, right? What are we going to build? And I'm going to try to just draw some diagrams out so we can kind of get a rough mock-up of like what we want. The first thing is obviously we want some type of sign-in page. So like when you first hit the app, maybe we want to have like a sign-in. And I'm going to try to keep the authentication as basic as possible. So don't get mad if I'm not like decrypting passwords, or I'm not even accepting passwords. I'm going to have a single just username sign in. So I'll just go ahead and do this. And I don't know why this is so big. I probably should zoom out just a little bit. So basically I want a form. Someone can put a username and then maybe click a button down here to actually like register or sign in. Okay, so sign in. Welcome to the online chat room. Let me reduce the text size of that a little bit. So this is like the overall idea of like when the person first hits the page, we want to show them like a welcome screen where they can type in a username, type in a password, and click a sign in button. I'm sorry, we're not going to do passwords. We're just going to keep it simple with the username. And so the idea is when the user actually types in their username, we're going to go ahead and send off a request to the database. So maybe I can get a database going here. This is typically a good icon for databases. So we'll get a database. And we're going to basically store something in like a user model. So let's just go ahead and say like create a user in user model. Okay. So when they sign in, we're going to save that. And later, where it's going to basically, I don't know what I'm going to do with authentication, maybe JWT, maybe sessions, but we're going to get back some type of sessions so that the next page they go to is going to show something like this. On the left, we're going to have kind of like Discord where you have like different groups. Where you have like different chat rooms, I guess you can have, you can join. That's the idea. And then inside of your little panel here, you have different rooms, all right? So you have, I'll just say like room A. And again, the idea is just make this a really, really basic prototype. I'm not going to put a ton of effort into styling or making this production ready. I just want to kind of show you and get your feet wet with like, how do you actually set up a real-time chat room with like history saved in your chat rooms and stuff like that. And then over here, we'll probably have some type of chat area where maybe the user can type into an input box and press like a submit button. And then finally, you're going to be able to see like all the users in the room. So I could do like Cody, Bob, Jane, something like that. Let me go ahead and left align this. And of course, we're going to have some text here. Like I'll say like hello. And that's probably going to have like a little image of a person who said their thing. Maybe it has their name too. So like I could put Bob said hello, put timestamp if you want. But I think that's the overall idea, right? So when they create the user, it's going to create a room for them. So just go ahead and like create a room. Let me say to create a room. And I shouldn't even say room, I should say like a server. I'll create a server. I want to kind of emulate what Discord's doing or what Slack's doing. So like you create a username, you get your own personal server that you can kind of invite people to. And the idea is like, you can actually get a URL and invite other people to your server. And when they do that, they're added to your server as well, and they can kind of join your rooms. So how do we kind of get these things to show up? Well, the plan is click an invite link to add other servers to your list. Like that. So that would be like a separate feature. But that's kind of like the overall goal. Just start with something simple, see if we can do it, see how hard it might be, how simple it might be. And we'll kind of come back to this image and just add on to it and change it if we decide that this is a good approach forward. And yeah, let's just go ahead and see if we can work on this sign-in page. And then later we're going to go to the Agora SDK and the Agora console. We're going to make a new project. We're going to set it up, and we're going to try to read through their SDK docs and create a basic client-server messaging system. We're also going to be creating our own token server, right? So if you want to do authentication with the Agora RTM library, which is for the real-time messaging, you kind of have to set up your own token server to authenticate users so they can actually send messages in different channels and stuff. But we'll figure that out along the way. Again, this is a live coding session, so there's going to be some times where I'm just going to be struggling reading through docs and trying to figure this out. So it's always good to kind of start with your backend, I believe, before you work on the front end. People have different perspectives on how they do it. Like some people like to mock out the backend and work on the front end, and then they'll come back and do the backend. I think it's just much easier just to start on your data models and start on your backend API endpoints or your tRPC mutations and queries so that you can kind of just hit the ground running with real data as you develop. So let's create a user model in Prisma, and then we're going to try to create a login page so we can actually like create a new user. So let's go ahead and load up that Prisma schema. And if I refer to the docs, don't judge me too hard because again, I don't have this stuff memorized. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this example model. We don't really need an example model. I'm going to go ahead and just rename it to user. And when we run the Prisma migration script, it's going to delete the old table and create a new one called user. So don't really worry too much. But this user could basically have an ID, which is going to be something that Prisma/SQLite is going to automatically define for us. So right here, we're basically saying, give us a unique ID for the ID. And we probably want to keep track of their name for right now. So I'm going to say name, and that's a string. Okay. And by the way, I do have a Prisma extension installed. So you just saw when I saved the file, it kind of formatted everything. I definitely recommend you have that set up as well. So let's just go ahead and try to hit the ground running with this user model and see if we can actually get this going. So like I said, you can say npx prisma migrate dev, and that's going to ask you for like, what do you want to name your new migration script? Because it saw that you changed model from example to user, and it needs to create a migration script for that. So I'm going to say adding user table and removing example table. And when I do that, it's going to create a file for us that looks like this, which has basically what I just mentioned. It drops the example table and it creates a user table. That's pretty cool. And additionally, now I can actually access this user table with my Prisma schema. So let's start with the backend, like I said. So how do you give the user access to create new users? Well, we could probably go over here to our router. Remember here, there is a server folder with a router and an index. And this is how tRPC kind of works, right? We have a router, and in that router, you can kind of combine the different routers together. So it's kind of very similar to Express with like subrouters and stuff like that. But let's just go ahead and rename example to, I don't know, user. And I'm going to rename example router to user router. And I'm going to go ahead and rename example to user. And let's see if we can continue. Actually, since this is a router, I'm going to call it user router. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure I export user router from there. All right, so this should be okay. All right, so we are using TypeScript, so we do get some error highlighting if we do mess anything up, which is great. but for the most part, it seems like it's working fine. So what we're trying to do in this example is we want to create a mutation, right? We want the user to basically send data over to the backend, and we want the backend to save and persist that data. So I'm going to say mutation, and I'll just say like create user or something like that. And what this is going to allow us to do is we can set up what inputs are required for a user to try to create a new one. And I'll just go ahead and say like name is a string that is required. And if you notice here, this is using something called Zod validation. So this is another library that you can use to validate stuff. It works really good with TypeScript. But you can basically define an object and say this object must have a property called name, and that name property must be of type string, and we're allowing it to be null. In our case, we don't want it to be null. It's required. You must fill in a name. And I believe you could probably put like a min character or min length if you wanted to, but I'm just going to keep it basic for right now. So that's how you kind of define like what things are required to hit that quote unquote router mutation or endpoint, if you want to say. And then you have a resolve method. So the resolve method is where you actually type out your code. This is where you can fetch data from the database. This is where you can store data from the database. So you can do authentication here, authorization, doesn't really matter. You can just do whatever you want here. So in this case, we need to persist the username that someone's trying to use. And again, we're using like super basic an example authentication and authorization because I don't want to waste too much time on that. If you want to learn more about how to set up authentication with like JWT or server sessions, this probably isn't a tutorial for you. I want to get past that part so we can just get to the good part, which is how do you create a online chat room with multiple rooms and servers. But anyway, when you're using Prisma, the way this thing is set up, there's a context file. And this context file is defining what things do you want your resolvers access to. In this case, we want access to Prisma. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and put comma context. And now I have access to ctx.prisma. And then I can grab whatever user model I want. In our case, we created one called user. Remember in the Prisma schema, we created a model called user, which gives us access to do user.create. Now, the arguments for creating a new data model or entry is you do data, and then you can pass it whatever you want. So in this case, we're going to pass in name. I'm going to say input.name. And I'm going to go ahead and do an await on this and say like created user is equal to that. Go ahead and put an async in front of that. And I'm going to return created user. All right, so does this all make sense? So basically, we just created a new mutation that our front end can invoke to pass in a name. The name is going to create a new user, which is going to auto-generate an ID. And then we're going to get that user and return it back to the front end. So let's go back to the front end because that's probably the best way to verify this is have the front end hit this mutation and see if it works. There's probably better ways and other ways you could do this. If you want to do like test-driven development, you will probably get that set up. Again, we're just trying to keep this really basic. And I want to show you how we could potentially build out a really basic non-password authentication. Definitely don't do this in production, but this is just for fun. It's like a nice little prototype so that we can get to the fun part, which is this. All right, so again, with Next.js, how do you create a new page? How do you create like a login page? Well, what we could do is we go to pages, and I'm going to go ahead and go to the index.tsx, which is like the main default route. Remember, if we go to our application here, when you go to the default route, which is just nothing or slash, it's going to load up this. We want to make this page look like this. Okay, so how do we do that? Let's go ahead and go to the index page, and let's just kind of gut out all the things we don't want. I'm going to name this the home page instead of hello. We don't need a technology card. So at this point, I am just kind of cleaning up some code. I don't need all of this code sitting around. We don't need this technology card sitting around either. I'll delete that. And I think we could probably just save this file and see what happens. All right. So let's try to make it match this little thing. So welcome to the online chat room. Let's just go ahead and say welcome to the online chat room. Go back, and there it is. The text is huge, so let's kind of scale that down. Now, again, we are using something called Tailwind CSS, where basically you style all your components using these little atomic class names, right? So if I want to scale down the text, well, there is a class called text, and I could do control space. And then I get a list of all the different classes I can use to style my text. I can change the size of it. I can change the color of it. I can do some other things with it. But we just want to make it a little bit smaller. So I'm going to say like XL. Go ahead and save that. And that should hopefully change it. Let me go ahead and delete some of this other stuff. Let me just go ahead and save that. There we go. So I made the text a little bit smaller. And that might be a little bit too small. Let me try 2x. Or I could do 4x. That looks pretty good. All right, so the next thing is we need an input box that says username. How do we create that in React? Well, we need to create a input box. Okay, you should know how to create an input box, hopefully. And in this input box, which I think I could just do a self-closing tag here, I'm gonna put a placeholder and I could say like username. Now, the one thing I'll point out about Tailwind CSS is that like basic things like inputs don't have any styles by default. So you actually have to style everything because there's like everything, it stripped all the styles off of all the normal DOM elements like input, select, stuff like that. But we do have a little input box that people can type something in. So let's do a little bit of quick styling with this. I'm gonna go ahead and just say like class name is equal to, I'll say padding 2, I'll say text XL, and I'll say border, right? So there's different classes. You can go to the Tailwind docs and learn about these and read about them, but this is just adding some padding inside of the text area. This is just increasing the size of the text, and this is just adding a border on it. So if I save this and go back, notice that we do have a little border. It's kind of faint, but you can see it, and I can actually type in something. Okay. And then finally, we need a button that says like sign in. Okay. So that's, again, not going to be styled. You hover over it. You do get a cursor. I can't talk right now, but we do want to style this a little bit as well. So let's just go ahead and give this a class name. And I'm going to go ahead and say like text of XL. Maybe we can make it blue. So BG hyphen blue slash or hyphen, these are different blues that you get out of the box with Tailwind. I'll probably pick like a 500. A cool thing in Tailwind as well, you can do like pseudo selectors. So I can say hover colon BG blue of 400. And so when someone hovers over this thing, the color is going to change to a lighter blue. So let's go over to this and make sure this works. And it does. So notice I hover over it, it changes colors. Looks pretty cool. And we can just keep on adding some different stuff to it. Like I could do like, I don't know, padding of 2. I could say like rounded, which makes the button look a little bit rounded. And I can make the text white. So I could say text is white. Okay. Now, if you're kind of new to Tailwind, you might notice that all these classes kind of go off the page and it becomes really ugly in my opinion, but you kind of get used to it. Just get a bigger monitor. I think there's also extensions you can use that'll put all these things on different lines. Like there's nothing stopping you from doing this, right? And putting these things on new lines. So if that helps you break up your classes, like you can do that. All right, so we got a title, we got an input, and we got a sign in button. I do want to put some gap in between all these. So if you're kind of new to Tailwind, there is a flex class we can use, which is just applying flexbox to these elements. And if you want to add some like gaps in between the top level components of whatever this flex is, like all the children that this flex contains, I could simply just say gap of, I don't know, do 4 or something like that. And now there's some spacing in between all of these. So again, we're not going to waste too much time on styling. Like that's not the important part. The important part is building out the functionality. So we got a basic page that you have a sign in button and a username. So the next steps is when you log in, like someone can type in a name like Bob. And when they click the sign in button, in fact, I should probably wrap this stuff in a form. I think if you want to do semantic HTML, like you should probably have this stuff wrapped in a form. And what we want to do is when the user submits the form or clicks the sign in button, I'm going to put a, on the form itself, I'm going to say on submit. That's going to call a function. In React, you can attach an on submit property to elements such as the form, and then you can have that call a callback function. What I like to do in my components and pages is I'll make a new function called like handle submit. It takes in an E, and just make sure you e.prevent default on that. And I'm going to go ahead and just pass that function right there. Now we will get some TypeScript errors because this thing actually requires it to be something called a form event handler. So let's go ahead and make sure this thing has the right type. And if I type that E, I think we should be good. And I will be 100% completely honest with you. I'm still trying to learn TypeScript. I've been using JavaScript for the longest time. So sometimes React on submit TypeScript property, or else I type. Sometimes I have to go look stuff up because I just forget about it. I've done this before. I just don't have it memorized. I think it's React form event, HTML event. I thought I had, that's what I had, but I think a good way to figure that out is if you just hover over it. I thought it would tell you, but yeah, in this case, it doesn't tell you the right one. So I'm just going to do this. All right, so you can judge me if you want. Again, like I told you, I'm learning TypeScript. I'm still learning Tailwind. I'm still learning Next.js. I'd never used Next.js in production. Just want to let throw that out there. That don't think that you're learning how to build a production ready app for me. I'm just showing you what I know, and I think what I know is enough to kind of get the ball rolling for you. All right. So what I'm trying to do is when you submit this form, we need to track what the user typed into the input box, right? So in React, you can add an onChange callback here. So I can say like onChange. Go ahead and do that. We can call another function. So let's go up here and we need to kind of track what the user typed in. So typically in React, we use state to track what the user typed or what the user is doing or like the state of the application. So we're going to bring in some state here. I'm going to say const, let's say username and set username. How about that? Equals use state. We're going to be using functional components with hooks, right? That's typically what people do these days. And when you do that, you can array to structure an array that has two elements. The first one's your state variable and the another one's your actual setter. So if we go ahead and make a new function called like const handle set username, and that's going to take it in E as well. And I'll probably have to go Google like what this is, to be honest with you. We're just going to basically say e.target.value here. And I'll put that right here in the onChange. Now, I totally forget what this is. If I had like GitHub Copilot, it would probably tell me right off the bat. I think it's like an input event. Okay, let me just go ahead and do like onChange. React, TypeScript, onChange type. You know, at one point I had these things memorized, but like I keep forgetting them for some reason because I'm a Dumbo head, but I think you could just do this. Change event more suitable for typing form events. Don't know which one you should use. I'll be honest with you all. The correct way to use in TypeScript is this React change event. I don't know what the right way is, but let's just go ahead and try this one and see if it complains. All right, so TypeScript is complaining because this is a string, but we haven't set the use state. So if you're kind of new with TypeScript, you can do something called generics where you pass in the type of thing, the type of variable that this state's going to store. In our case, I'm going to say string, and that should kind of work for us, right? So I have to memorize these. I just always forget about, form event, change event, but maybe one day I'll memorize it, maybe next year, but probably not right now. But anyway, as the user types in, I want to make sure this works. Okay, so a great way to check when stuff works or not, just interpolate that out to the screen, right? So I should be able to go back and just type, and I see it printing out here. So I know the state's working properly. What you can also do as well is you can go to your React tools. This is an extension you have to install, but if you go to components and you go to the thing that should be holding your state, which in our case would be home, you see that the state is being updated as I type in here. But it's kind of delayed, which is why it's sometimes easier just to print it straight to the page and you can get that rapid feedback. All right, so we got the state, and now what we want to do is when you actually submit the form, we want to invoke a TRPC mutation. You remember that mutation we just created over here? It's called create user. Well, now comes the time that we can actually call it. So when you're using TRPC, you can actually pull out a variable or a constant, and I can say like create user is equal to trpc.use mutation. And I'm going to say user.create user. You see how I got that TypeScript IntelliSense right off the bat? Like I didn't have to think about what I'm doing. I can just go ahead and click on this. And now I get back a variable which has a mutate method and a mutate async method. So that's pretty cool. And what we're going to do is we are going to go ahead and just call create user.mutate async, mainly so that we can await on it because we need to actually make sure that the registration worked fine. And we can pass it some data, right? Remember the thing that this Prisma schema requires is name. So if I go ahead and do a control space, this is telling us what we need to pass. And this says we need to pass it name, and I'll just go ahead and say username. Now this has a chance, like you'll see this stuff a lot in TypeScript where it's like user name might be undefined. So if you ever get an error like this, in the function above, you could just say if not username, then return. There's other ways you can check it too. You could do like an exclamation mark, you could do like a question mark potentially. I could go into here and I could change it to allow this to be nullish and then throw an error if they pass a null. But this is probably the easiest way. Just check if it's not defined so that the user's browser doesn't actually allow them to do that. And there's tons of like gold plating we could add to this application, but honestly, we're just trying to do the simplest thing to hit the ground running. So let's test it out, shall we? I did notice that sign in is now moved up here. That's kind of strange. I don't know why that got pushed up. It's because I wrapped it in a form, and now my flex column thing is not working. So I think I need to add a class name here. I could say flex column, and then gap of 4 as well. There, now it's below it. It looks a little bit better. All right, so let's type in Bob, and we're going to go ahead and click submit. But before I do that, let me show you something. So we're using Prisma, and luckily, Prisma has a nice tool you can use called Prisma Studio. So if I say npx Prisma space Studio, that'll load up a service on port 5555 that I can actually peer into my models and see what's there. So right now there's nothing here. There's nothing in my users. But if I go ahead and click sign in, the UI is not going to really show anything because we didn't implement any logic. But I'm going to go ahead and click sign in here, and it actually failed. So let's go ahead and figure out why this thing just failed. Cannot read properties of undefined reading create. So let us figure out why that thing just didn't work. And like I said, this is a live coding, so we're going to run into some bugs, which is going to be pretty good for you guys to watch if you're a beginner and you want to watch someone kind of struggle with some bugs. One common thing I will do all the time is just restart my server. Sometimes restarting your server allows it to reload whatever TypeScript stuff that it needs to when Prisma was like recreated. So let's try it one more time and see if this works. I'm going to type Bob, click sign in, and that fixed it. Okay, so keep that in mind. Restarting your next application server, sometimes you got to do it when you change your model in Prisma. But it did the request. If you're not familiar with the network tab down here, it shows you every time the browser makes a request to the backend, and you can click on the actual request and get more information about it. Okay, so it did a post request to this endpoint, and it sent this payload. So notice we sent some JSON that had the name of Bob. I believe this is using something called super JSON behind the scenes, so that's why the JSON looks kind of weird, but it's useful whenever you need to do some type of like batch uploads and patch requests and stuff like that. But let's look at the results that came back from the back. And you notice in data, we get back an ID and name Bob. So that's the thing that was actually stored in the database. And I can further exemplify that by going to Prisma Studio and clicking that refresh button. And notice right here, we actually stored an entry in the database. So that is pretty cool. Now, I will say that maybe we want to make it so like if someone has a unique username, someone else can't have it as well. So we could probably go back and we could add a check to Prisma to say like this has to be unique here so that no one else can grab the same name Bob. So we can do that, and let's just go ahead and say npx Prisma migrate dev. I'll say I know that the bottom of my screen is sometimes cut off, so I apologize for that, but let's just go ahead and run it. Are you sure you want to create and apply this migration? Yes. So I think the issue is that like adding a unique constraint could potentially break all your existing data. So it tells you that if there are existing duplicate values, this will fail. Okay, but there's not because we just created one entry. So I'm gonna go ahead and say like make name unique. And please forgive me if stuff is cut off at the bottom of my screen sometimes. I just forget about it. And then also the top right, I sometimes forget I have my webcam running. So if there's something that I cut off, I apologize. All right, so let's go back to the main page, and let's go ahead and click on, I'm gonna click sign in for Bob again. Now this should crash because I don't have the server running. So let's npm run dev. Make sure you got that server running. And I'm going to refresh the page. I'm going to type in Bob. And this should crash because there's already a user called Bob. Okay, so in the router, we should probably make it a little bit smarter to have it not crash if you use a username that's already existing. And again, like I told you all, like this is not a production ready setup. I'm just trying to get something really basic so you can create a new user and kind of give you, an overview of how TRPC works, an overview of how Prisma works, and how you can like ingest data into Prisma into your SQLite database. So let's take this a step further. I'm going to say if the user already exists with the name of Bob, then don't create it, right? So I'm going to say, let's just go ahead and say like check if user exists. I'm going to say await CTX Prisma user find. I'll just say find first. How about that? There's different like methods you can use, but I want to find where the name is equal to input.name. All right, does that make sense? So find in the database any user that has the name of, in this case, Bob. And if that user exists, I might rename this a little bit to existing user. So if existing user is defined, then we could just go ahead and return existing user. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and create a new user like that. So that's going to prevent our backend from crashing if someone tries to log in with a user of like Bob and Bob already existed. So let's just go ahead and click sign in and notice that it doesn't crash. It just returns a good thing. Now I could rename create user to something like sign in. Maybe that would make more sense. But again, like we're not shooting for super quality here. We're just trying to get something going. So after we logged in, right, we probably need to keep track of the user ID, which we can use for like sending across the wire with Agora RTM, right? So this is a thing that we want to use when we send messages across the wire with Agora so that it knows like who sent this message and stuff. So what we're going to do is we're probably going to store this somewhere in context or state or some type of global state so we can keep track of the actual user ID of who was logged in. Okay, so does that make sense? So let's go back to when we sign in, and we are going to go ahead and go to this page. This is the index, which has like that sign in form. And what we want to do here is I'm going to put some to-dos so we can kind of keep track of what we want to do. Is step 1, save the user ID in global state. Save in global state, we could do local storage. I think context with global state might be the easiest. I think the easiest way to do this is we could just use context, right? You could bring in Zustan if you wanted to. You could bring in like Redux or whatever state management library you like using. But I believe we can keep this a little bit simpler by just simply creating some context here in the app. If I can figure out where the stuff is, I believe it's this one. And wrap the component with some context. So how do we figure that out? I'm going to make a new folder called context. And I'm going to make one called user context.ts. Export const user context is equal to react.create context. So if you don't know how context works, this is how you can basically create something that you can kind of have a global or a higher level state that is shared amongst different pages and stuff like that. And again, like this might not be the best approach, but I'm going to go ahead and pass null for it right now. So we have a user context file that's exporting a user context variable, and we're going to use that in app. So I'm going to go ahead and just bring it in by saying user context.provider. I believe this is how you do it. And let me just go ahead and make sure I don't have errors here. User context. All right, so auto import that, and we want to do .provider, which might be a capital P, so that's a my bad. Luckily, TypeScript is coming in clutch and telling us what we're doing wrong. And then it's also saying that we need to pass it a value, right? So how do we keep track of the user? Well, we need to use some state, right? That's one way you can do it in React, and I think it's kind of the only way you can do it in React. So I'm going to go ahead and say like const user and set user equals useState. And I'm going to go ahead and pass that a default empty object for now. Go ahead and import the useState hook. And for value, I'm going to go ahead and just pass it user and set user. How about that? So what this allows us to do is we can actually import this context in other components and get the user and set the user. So it kind of allows us to have higher level state that's shared amongst all of our subchildren and components. People might argue that context is inefficient because it like re-renders all your components, but honestly, how often are you setting the user and getting the user? Not that often, right? So it's okay to like set the user once, and then throughout your entire application as they're navigating through routes, it's still going to use that same state and probably never set it again. But we are getting a little error here, which I may have to go Google. This type user blah 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 is not assignable to type null. I'm not sure what that actually means, so I might have to go look that up. So I'm gonna go ahead and say like React context provider TypeScript is not assignable to type null. Hopefully you get lucky with the first link. And someone is saying, I'm trying to create some context. I'm getting this error, which is the same error that we're getting as well. The first answer is, why are you assigning null to the string array? So I think the issue is I created the context with null, and I should probably create it with an empty object or something. So let's try that out. Let's go ahead and create it with an empty object. And our error went away. So yeah, hopefully that's good. All right, so let's go back to step one, because remember, if we wrap our component with a provider, every component and subchild of that component will have access to this hook, or to this context using a hook. So if we wanted to do step one, which is save the user ID and global state, we can say const, we're going to call it user and set user equals use context, and we're going to go ahead and just import that file, which is called user context. Okay. If you haven't used context before, this is how you do it. You use the context, you pass it the actual top level context that we created in this file, and then you have access to whatever you stored in the value, which happens to be this, remember? So now every application, every component, every page has access to this as long as you just call use context, I believe. So what we're going to try to do is we're going to save that user that the backend sends back, which I can say like, I'll just say like my user is equal to this, and I'm going to say set user my user. And luckily, if you look over this, this already has a type of user. Okay, so using TRPC, we know what this thing's going to return. It happens to return a user object. And what we can actually probably store here, if I go to the top level provider here, this state here, I'm going to go ahead and say user, and I'm going to pass that the user from the Prisma client. And I think I might have to do some stuff like this. I'll say like ID of null and name of empty string. Okay. So that was just so like we can hopefully make this happy. That user does not exist on type empty object. Might have to do this here as well. Name is empty string and ID is empty string. And by the way, if I ever do something wrong in my videos, like call me out, that's fine. Property set user does not exist on type name string ID string. Oh, I'm dumb. So I think the default needs to be like user, which I'll just do this for right now. And then I'm going to call set user is, I'm just going to use any. I don't want to waste too much time with like fighting with TypeScript, I'll be honest with you all. But I think that'll fix my issue. Hopefully. Probably not though. Might have to actually type this stuff. Oh, that can't be any. What am I doing? All right, let's see if this is actually working. Set user should take in a user and a user from Prisma. All right, so I don't know. I'm bad at TypeScript, I'll be honest with you. Sometimes I just struggle trying to figure out what all these errors mean. But let's just see if this works, to be honest. I don't know if it will, but when we submit and sign in, we're going to set that user on state. And then we just need to redirect to another page, right? The idea, if I go back, I wasted a lot of time with TypeScript, but it's cool. Hopefully you guys learned something. We need to go to a page that looks like this. So let's just go ahead and make a new route called like dashboard. So if I go to my pages here, I'm gonna go ahead and make a new one called dashboard, TSX. And I'm gonna go ahead and just export a dashboard page. So I'll say dashboard page. And I believe this is a type of next page. So I don't know if you truly need to like import that type, but we're gonna do it anyway. And on the dashboard page, all we need to do is just redirect the user after they log in. So let's go back to that login page, which is on the index. And if you want to change a user's page or a route, there's a hook with next called const router is equal to use router. Go ahead and import that. And we can call router.push / dashboard. Okay. All right. So all that work just so that we can basically log in with Bob, click sign in, and go to the dashboard page. And the last thing we need to check is like, did we mess something up with the context? Like, is this actually working on context? And I believe what we could probably do, hopefully, is find which one of these is storing that context. And honestly, I don't know which one it would be. It's this one, I think. So this one, my app has some state, and notice that it is storing Bob. So we've persisted some state from going from the index page to dashboard. And if we wanted to kind of display that, let's just go ahead and go back to our use query here. Or sorry, the use context. Let's go to the dashboard. And we're going to get back the user from that context and just import that. Make sure you import that one too. And let's just see if we can display something basic. So I'm going to say const user.name and user.id. So it doesn't think user actually has anything because I think I need to actually go back and type this. Does this take a generics? I think it might take generics. So back to TypeScript land. Let's say props, or I'm going to say type user context, user context. Sorry, I'm kind of like not doing a great job because TypeScript is like a domain that I'm just still trying to learn. But I'm going to type this thing to have a user. And then also I'm going to say set user takes in a user like this. Okay, so we have a type, and I believe with TypeScript you can pass in generics here like this, and let us hopefully just default these like this. Name is empty as well. Did I make TypeScript happy? I hope I did. And in fact, I don't think I need to even... I don't know. Sometimes you get warnings. I'm not going to waste too much time on those. But if I go back to the dashboard, now I don't get warnings here because this thing knows like that the context is actually storing a user here. So sometimes it's worth just putting the extra effort to make sure you get the right stuff. But let's go back to the main page. I think you do have to relog in as Bob. And when you do that, we have that ID. So now we can use that ID when we want to like connect to the Agora dashboard or send off messages and stuff. All right, so we are making some slow progress, but let us go ahead and look at what we want to do next. So the first thing is we want to create a server, okay? So when you make a new user, that user should have access to their own server and they can create their own rooms. So let's try to figure out a way we can kind of display all the servers that belong to a user. And maybe we can kind of create a new like server model. Okay, so let's go to the Prisma schema again. And I'm going to make a new model here called server. Okay. Again, that's going to have an ID. I could just go ahead and kind of copy that. And it's also going to have a, I guess the person who owns the server. So maybe you could have like a user ID. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to say this user has a server. So when you're using Prisma, you can actually like add relationships between models. You may have to go to the docs to remember how to do this, but you can basically say that a user owns one server, right? So a user has a server and that server belongs to a user, right? An owner. So I think, which I don't remember how to do, no shame, let's go to the docs. That's why they created docs for people like me to go and remember how to do it. So here's an example of how you make a user has many posts. and that posts, or that post has an author, okay? I might keep it really simple for right now. I might just say like, I'll just say servers, like this, because we're not trying to make a fully functional like application. We're just kind of do it like a nice prototype. But you can kind of do this, I believe. And let's just go ahead and do something like that. All right, so the server belongs to a user. All right, this one I might have to go and refresh my memory. I've done this multiple times. I just don't, at this point, I don't remember. I think this is more like a many-to-many relationship. So many users can actually like belong to a server and vice versa. So I might need to go look up many-to-many, which if you go over here in the docs, they tell you how to do it. And basically you have a post can have many categories, and a category can have many posts, but you have to make like a separate model, I believe, which let's see if we can kind of figure out how to do that. I don't think I've actually done a many-to-many yet, so this will be a cool learning experience. I'll say servers user. Servers user, how about that? Or user servers. So we want to keep track of what servers a user is part of, okay? So you can do a user ID, and you can do a server. And that could be a server as well. Server ID. This needs to be a string. Let's see if we can kind of make sense of this. I think these also need to be strings as well. Do capital string. So basically we want to relate, let me get rid of that server stuff. We want to relate a user by their user ID to the ID of the user. Okay, sometimes I get tripped up on the schema stuff, especially since I don't really work full time with SQL anymore. I use a lot of DynamoDB, which is like a key value store. But this one could just be server ID. So what this is saying is you're saying this relationship, this server ID on this model points to this ID on server. And we could just make sure we have user ID and server ID here. All right, so one thing you'll notice, I just saved the file and it automatically added all my relationships that I might need onto my user and server model. That's cool. Hopefully I did this right. We'll find out real quick. Again, make sure you do your migrate. And that is going to ask you to enter a new name for your migration. I'm going to say adding many-to-many relationship between user and server. That'll create my model. That'll create my migration script and run it. And hopefully, if I keep my fingers crossed, we should be able to create a server when the user first logs in. So let's go back. Let me just close some of these tabs. We're going to go back to the router/user router. And when the user creates a user/logs in, if the user was a brand new user, then we should probably create a brand new server for them as well. So I'm going to say await context prisma.server.create data, and we can just go ahead and probably give it a user, which I think we might just be able to pass it created user here. Actually, I just do user ID. So I can say created user.id. Okay, I think that's how you do it. And what we're going to do is, I think that's about it. We don't care about passing the server back just yet. So let's see if this works. We're going to go back to the UI. We are going to go back to the login page. My app is down because I forgot to run it. So let me just go ahead and make sure I run that app. Go back, refresh this page. I'm going to type in like my name, Cody. And hopefully, keep my fingers crossed, when I run this, it should create my user, Cody. I got an ID. And if I go to Prisma Studio and I go back to the top level, refresh, which I guess I need to restart Prisma as well. So let's go ahead and restart my Prisma Studio so I can see those changes. We get back server and user server. So let's look at server real quick and notice that it did create the server. And I guess it's pointing to the user Cody. Yeah, so we can go back to user servers. I guess this one's blank because for some reason that relationship was not added in. But I guess we know who created the server. I'm not too certain I did my relationship correctly, but I mean, we'll figure this out, I hope. So we probably also need to see if there's a way to store the user who's part of that user server. So let's see if we can say like, in fact, we might be able to say like servers. Let me try the easiest way that I know. Honestly, I'm still new with Prisma. So what if we just go ahead and say context Prisma user servers dot create data. Let's see what this thing actually needs. We probably need to pass it a server ID, which would be the one we just created. And then also we probably need the user ID. Go ahead and await on this too. And now that should link this user to the server. And I think we're going to use this later on in the UI to like know what servers they belong to. So let's just go back and try again with like Bobby. Click sign in, go back to Prisma Studio. And this one has many people who are part of it, I guess. Now, so if I go to the user, I think we can say user and we can see what user servers are part of. So Bobby is part of one server. Well, I guess servers is an array too, so maybe I'm just kind of confusing some stuff. Anyway, we'll figure this out, right? This is how I like the program. You just experiment and prototype along the way. It's like investigative discovery, I guess. I don't know what the term is for it, but iterative design's a good name for it. But you figure stuff out along the way until you can memorize the stuff. You don't have to go and look up docs anymore, and you become really proficient at it. But I'm not at that stages yet with Prisma and like SQL and relationships. You think I should because I've been doing this for so long, but I haven't touched SQL in a very long time. But anyway, let's just see if we can do this. Like we just want to show some servers here. In fact, maybe like, yeah, we'll just show like the server name and who created it. So going back to the dashboard page, let's go ahead and go to dashboard. And we are going to make a new PRPC query, which is going to fetch all the servers that belong to you as a user. So let's go ahead and go back to our router and let's add a new query. Right? We haven't done a query yet. It's pretty easy to do. You just do a query. You say get servers and you pass it something similar. You pass it an input, which in this case, I believe we could just probably leave off. Potentially, I mean, we should probably at least take in like the username because I'm not really doing sessions right now. I'm trying to keep this simple. But we want to take in the user ID actually, now that I think about it. So take in the user ID and also a resolve, which let's just copy this one. And I'm going to go ahead and do this. And so the idea is that when you call this get servers, we want to basically return all the servers that belong to that user ID. So I'm going to say const servers is equal to context.prisma.server. Actually, I'm going to say user servers dot find mini where hopefully I'm not going too fast and like losing you all, but let's go and find all of the user servers that match the user ID that was passed in, and let's go ahead and return that. Okay. So the idea is we're going to use this query method on the dashboard page so we can get back all of these servers. So I'm going to say const get servers equals trpc.use query. Let me make sure I'm auto importing that correctly. And I'm going to go ahead and say, we haven't used the use query yet, but basically you pass in an array and these can be different keys. In our case, we want to call that endpoint we just created user.getServers, and that should give us back our data, right? So getServers should have a data property on it now, which we can loop over. So I'm going to say getServers.data.map, and let's just go ahead and put these in curly braces so we can actually map over them. I'm going to say server.server ID. How about that? All right, so what am I missing here? Oh, to do the query, you also have to pass it another thing in the array, I believe, which we could just say :user ID is equal to user.id. Because remember, this came from context as user, and we know what the ID is. And we could basically grab the servers for every user that has this ID. And this is complaining because it's saying that this is possibly undefined. So you could just probably not map over it, I believe. Or if you just want to just say if getServers.data is not defined, we could just return null or return an empty fragment. I don't know what the proper way is to do it in React, to be honest, but object is possibly undefined. I don't know why that's complaining about object being, I just put a check here that should have hopefully not displayed it, but I think also there might be a way to like set an initial props. Let's say if there's an initial data, I could just pass in an empty array, and then I don't think this would be undefined anymore, hopefully. No, I think I need to actually do something with them. Anyway, yeah, I'll just say like getServers data const user servers is equal to this. Bear with me, I'm like kind of talking out loud, but what I want to do is just fall back on like an empty array if this thing is not defined. Oh, I'm sorry. I have an extra div here, which is like, I think messing me up. Let me just go ahead and do this. And I'm all over the place right now, but all right. Sometimes it's better just to start fresh. All right. We have a little div here. And in that div, like we have some text. I don't know if you ever do that in coding where like you just get really hung up on something, but we kind of want like two divs. We want the title, and then we also want to map over these user servers, which I believe we could just, again, like, let me see if I can do this again. I'll just do this. I'm so sorry for jumping around, y'all. I know I'm probably confusing y'all. But if user server.data.map, I'm going to go ahead and say server. That is going to call a function that's going to take in some divs and return some divs. Just put hi here for right now. Okay. Are we making any progress? Server.id. All right. Like I said, I'm doing some live coding. I'm fixing some bugs. I think this might work. Okay. That took me a while. I got kind of caught up because I had like I was missing a div at the end and like I was getting confused. But I think this should fetch all the servers for my user and probably display them. So let's go back and log in as like Jane. And now we get back all the servers that are associated with Jane. All right. So that was a lot of work just to get something basic. I know we haven't really done much in the UI, but let's see if we can kind of like style this a little bit. So again, if we go back to Excel we're trying to get a little panel here with some circles, right? That's all we're trying to do. And I think we can achieve it by just simply putting this thing, let's give it a class name of like width of 12. And for right now, I'm gonna say background gray of 200, just so that we have like some reference. And we want this thing to be full screen, right? So I'm going to say h of full, Now the issue with this is that like every single parent thing you have to have like h of full as well. So I'm going to say h of full as well here. So height of full, that's a tailwind class you can use. And again, like you have to keep going up the chain and you have to keep on adding h of full. So luckily in Tailwind, there's like a global styles like this, which is located here in styles. And I believe I can say like body, maybe document, and I could just do like an add apply h of full. Maybe. Sometimes it helps to hover over and figure out what is missing what. So body and HTML probably both need h of full. So body, HTML, this thing, wherever this is defined, needs an h of full as well. So I think I can just do ID is equal to next. Was that an underscore in it? Underscore, I think it was 2 underscores. So let's go ahead and make sure that we give that any attribute that has, I'll say any div that has an attribute, also give that an h of full. Whew, all right, so we got that div showing up all the way. There's also like a semicolon. I don't know where that's coming from. Let's see if we can find that semicolon. Probably in app, I probably have a semicolon somewhere right here. Okay. All right, so we have a little panel here and we're trying to show circles for all the servers. I might give it a little bit more width, maybe 16. Okay, and inside of this panel, we want to put all of our servers, which we are mapping over them right here. So let's just go ahead and add like a class name. And I believe there's like a rounded, I think rounded will make it round. Oh, rounded full will make it round. And I can give like a background color of, I don't know, let's just stick with like that blue color scheme. And we're going to say width of 10, height of 10. Hope this works. Obviously, it's not going to work because the context is not persisting. So when I do a full like refresh on the on next, it's going to clear out my context. So I think, need to like relog in with like someone fresh. And here you have it. So he is belonging to the server of CL6. Honestly, we could just take the first character of this and just center it. So I'll say flex, and then I'll say justify center is, I believe, how you do it in item center as well. And we could just go ahead and get the first letter of this. So I'm going to say char at index 0. There we go. We got a little C. That'd be cool if we could also like get this rounded button to be centered inside the div as well. So I think we need to give this thing some flex as well. It's W16. So let's give this some flex, justify center, and that'll align it like this. And probably some padding top of 4 it down. And I mean, we make this a little bit bigger, I think. There. So we have like our server displayed, and probably want to also, like, if you hover over this, we could say BG blue of 200 and probably give it a cursor pointer. I think it's just pointer maybe. No? Cursor of pointer. All right, so a lot of work, but we have the server displayed. So my question now is, what should we work on next? I think having like an invite link where someone can easily join your server might be interesting to work on next, or just work on these rooms and we can get to the fun part of like, how do you actually send live messages to each other? All right, so what do you all want to work on next? Although you guys can't respond to me, I'm still going to ask you. I think it'd be cool to work on the rooms. I mean, there's like so much we can work on. There's so much we could probably start working on right now, but let's just make a room and then maybe have a text area that you can send messages and stuff. And then later we can add like the ability to join other people's servers. So again, let's make another panel here. In fact, again, like I mentioned, I like to start with the backend first so that you can actually have real data to play with. So maybe we should start with another TRPC mutation and maybe another Prisma model called rooms. So a server can have multiple rooms, and let's see if we can figure that out. That's like a one-to-many relationship. So let's go over here to one-to-many. And this one hopefully should be more straightforward. Hopefully I do it right. I don't even know if I did this other schema right, but call me out in the comments if I didn't. But a server has many rooms. So let's just go make a model called room. And I'll give it an ID. Let's just do this. We could probably give it a name too. Like it makes sense to give a room a unique name. And then we want to allow a server to have many rooms. So I'm going to say room like this. And I love Prisma or whatever the extension I'm using because it just basically auto imported all of my stuff. Okay, so a room belongs to a server and I can actually reference that server like this. Although I don't think a capital S there. Yeah, I don't know. They want me to have a capital S for server, so I guess I'll keep it. But yeah, that's how I guess you can do it. So now again, let us just go ahead and stop Prisma Studio because we're going to have to restart that anyway. And let's just go ahead and run a migrate. And hopefully that's good. So adding rooms to servers. There you have it. Let's run the dev server and let's go back and run Prisma Studio so that we can actually inspect the data if we ever need to. All right, so again, we created the model. Now let's move on to the TRPC mutation because we want people to be able to basically create rooms in the server. So I'm gonna make a new router for this one. I'm gonna go ahead and copy the user router I have right here. I'm gonna go ahead and say server router. I think some of these methods are kind of really specific to the server. So I'm gonna say server router, and let's just go ahead and delete this. I'll make one called create room. We're gonna fix all this in a second, but make sure you go to your index, and I'm gonna merge this with server dot, and I'll say server router. Go ahead and figure out why that's not working because I have a semicolon there. So I need to fix my syntax error. Why is that doing that? There we go. All right, so we made a new router that's kind of only specific for server related data, creating a server, creating rooms in a server. And we're going to make inside that server router, I'm going to make a new mutation called create room, which I just kind of started on. And this is going to take in, again, a name. So you want to be able to name your room. And we're going to go ahead and just probably needs to take in a server ID too, right? Server ID g.string. And you might say, Cody, well, like, why aren't you adding authentication to any of this stuff? Again, this is just not a production ready application. At some point, you can come back and add authentication and add sessions in JWT, but that's not as important as like getting the real functionality and the prototype working, in my opinion. So we're just going to go ahead and just allow any user to hit this mutation and pass in server ID and a name. Okay, is that secure? No. Well, let's just go ahead and do it. So context Prisma, I'm going to say room.create because we want to create a new room, right? And then I'm going to say data. And what do we need to pass this? Well, we probably need to tell it what server it's part of. So I'm going to say input.serverID. And then we probably want to give it a name. So we'll do that. Make sure you wait on it. I'm going to say new server is equal to this. And I'm going to return new server. And I know like technically I could have just like returned this right here. And I didn't need to do all this other stuff. And but what ends up happening is like as you're debugging and trying to do stuff, it's just much easier if this stuff is already set up in a variable. So I can just come in here and just log it. Because if you write code to like be really concise and you just return, you don't do a wait and an async, you have to come back in and add all the extra stuff just to see what new server is. So I like to just do it, even though it's not the most efficient probably, but it gives me this really quick ability to come in and add a console log or a debugger right where I want it. Anyway, that was like a side tangent. So let's just go ahead and go back to the front end. What are we doing? We're trying to allow the user to create a room, okay? So once they're part of a server, they should be able to create a room in that server. So let's go back to, let's close all this stuff. Let's go to the pages and let's go to the dashboard. Okay. So let's just add a button. We need like another panel here where you have all your rooms, kind of like Discord. And I'm just going to copy this and paste it here. I'm going to give this double the width, and I'm going to give it a little bit lighter background, but everything else is probably going to be pretty consistent. And I'll just go ahead and save that and make sure that we get something. I might need to actually put some text here for it to show up. Let's see, why is it not showing up? Let's see. So I think it's probably showing up below. Yeah, it's way down here. So again, Flexbox is your friend. Learn how to use Flexbox. This parent div here contains 2 children. If you want those things to be side by side, like adjacent to each other, you can say flex. That's it. Boom. They're right next to each other. Don't disregard the server's gone because again, we refresh the page. But we're just trying to focus on this. So we could probably make this actually much larger. I'm going to say like, what options do we have? Let's do like 60. Okay, that looks a little bit better. And inside of this, I'm going to go ahead and make a button called Create Room. And here we got a button here. And I'm going to go ahead and not justify content center here. I want the stuff to go, for some reason this is being centered. I think it's because I'm using flex, like I don't want to use flex. Here we go. And what we want to do is, again, probably give this thing a little bit of padding. So instead of padding top, I'm just going to give it straight on 4 pixels padding, or padding of 4, which I don't know what rim that is. It looks like it's a 1. So 1 rim padding around the entire component. And we probably want to style this button, okay? So if you know anything about React and components and stuff, like it makes sense to make a different component for your buttons at some point, because you're going to have a bunch of different primary, secondary buttons all through your application. And for an example, if we go to pages/index, we have a button down here that looks like this. So I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup. Honestly, I would bring in like a design library if you wanted to, but again, I'm trying to show you like Tailwind, how you can actually use Tailwind and React and build out components and stuff. So let's go and make a, I don't think we have a components folder. I'll make a components directory. I'm going to say button.tsx. And I'm going to go ahead and just export that button. And I'm going to go ahead and just do this. So for making a reusable primary button, in fact, I could have called this primary button, but let's just keep it simple for right now. I'm going to let this thing take in some children so that someone can easily just pass in whatever text they want. And that's about it, I'm pretty sure. Now TypeScript's yelling at me because of like the implicit any. So I'm going to say type props is equal to, I think I can say like key of string any. And I'm going to go ahead and make this a functional component that takes in props. So let's make sure this thing works. So what I just did here was I'm basically saying this is a React functional component. It takes in props, and this could be anything, right? I could take in whatever I want from this. And that's why I got rid of that error. Now it's warning about this being any. So that's another thing. I mean, there's probably a better way to do this, but I just wanted to get that error out of my face. But now the whole purpose of that is I can go back here and I can change this to a button and import it from my components. I don't need to put a class on it anymore. And now we should have a blue sign in button on the dashboard, which I'll show in a second. And then also we can do the same thing here where I can make a button called create room. And now we have a reusable component that's blue and it's the same on both pages. Okay. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and just delete all my users because I think some of them have some bad data in them. All right, I'm getting some foreign key constraints. So like, let me show you a little trick. Don't know if this is the best trick, but you can basically delete your SQLite database if you want to. So I'm going to go to, where am I going to go? I'm going to Prisma. I'm just going to delete this database, just completely blow it away. And I can rerun my migrations and that'll regenerate everything. And I can rerun my server. That's how you can start with a clean blank slate. Sometimes you want to do that if you just have a bunch of fake data that you don't care about. Now everything's cleared out. I can go back, log in as Bob, and now every time I log in as Bob, he should have that one server associated with them. All right, so we have a way to create a new room. And if I were to click this button, what do you want us to do? I think we should probably show some type of modal. How can we do that? Well, I think one way is there's something called headless UI, which has, you know, a couple of useful components you can kind of use. They have a modal right here, and they'll show you how to kind of get it going. So if you follow the instructions, you can install it like this. I'm gonna go over here and just go ahead and stop that, install it, rerun my dev server, close it out. And we are going to just look at the examples. So the purpose of headless UI is that they give you these like reusable functional components, but they don't style them for you. There's no styling. And I mean, they give you some examples of how you could potentially style them like this, which we could probably do. Like if you go down to add a backdrop, I'm just going to take this entire thing and I'm going to plop it down into a modal component. So I'm going to say modal.tsx and go ahead and do this. And if I plop it down, like I mentioned, let me just do this. All right, so now we actually have like a component that we should be able to actually like use. I don't like comments, so I'm gonna delete those. But let's try this out. This is a modal that takes in a, let's see, dialog is open. So this should probably take in like an is open, that is open type of thing. And this doesn't need to own its own state. We're gonna have the state live outside of this component. We'll go back through and we'll fix this like TypeScript error later. I'm just kind of tired of fixing TypeScript errors. But if we look at this, let's try to get this displayed when you click on that create room button. Okay, so if we go to the dashboard, we should have a create room button. Command F, just go to create room. And when you click it, we want to show that modal. Okay, so let's just go ahead and on this page itself, and maybe even outside of this flexbox thing, like you can add a fragment here. And I'm gonna go ahead and just put the modal at the bottom like so. Make sure I import it. And I'm gonna make some new state called like show modal and set show modal is equal to use state. Import that, I'm gonna say false. All right, so this modal takes in an is open and set is open. So I'm gonna say is open, set is open, could be called set show modal. Now for the sake of it, like I might rename this to show create. I'm gonna rename this to create. I'm sorry, I can't speak right now. I'm gonna call it show create room modal. Super verbose, but it's good to be verbose in your naming of variables. Set show create room modal. All right. So I'm gonna set this thing to true here so that when we load the page, we can actually visualize what this component is gonna look like. And right here it says complete your order. But notice that we have this like really basic backdrop of a modal. It's super ugly. We have to like add some styling to it. But inside of the modal itself, we are using headless UI. So like we could easily just come in here and say like, I don't know, I'll just add a button here and I'm gonna say like create. Make sure I auto import that too. Now we got a create button. Go ahead and say create room. And what we could actually do is we could add, create a new room, could be in the title. There you have it. And the modal itself, like we could probably give it like a padding of, I don't know, 8. Although I think I put it on the wrong thing. I probably want to put it on this, padding of 8. There we go. So what does this modal need to do? Well, first of all, we probably want a close button, to be honest. So let's go ahead and say like close or cancel. And when someone clicks on the cancel, I'm gonna say unclick, handle cancel. I'll make a new function up here called like const handle cancel. And this is just a function that's gonna basically set is open to false. Okay, because they don't actually want to do anything. They decide they don't want to create a new room. And let's verify this works. So if I click on cancel, does the modal go away? And it's not going away. So maybe we messed something up. I'm not sure why it says dialog on close. Anyway, let's see. When I click cancel, not going away, which I think it would because on click should cancel the modal. Oh, I know what's going on. So I think we should dynamically show the modal like this. I'm just gonna do some refactoring, and I'm gonna have the modal just have a single function called onClose. Okay, so there's something inside the modal the user clicked. Maybe it's an X in the top right. Maybe it's a cancel button. And I'm gonna go ahead and just allow the higher level component to take care of the onClose. So let's just go ahead and do some of this stuff. Like, I'm also not sure why like this thing even needs an onClose. I'll just go ahead and do this. Actually, let me just play around with this. So if I pass false here, does this thing not show? onClose. I will say handle close create room modal. That'll be the function name. I know I'm jumping around and like trying to make sure I understand what I'm trying to do here. So I'm just trying to make a new function that when you invoke it, we're going to say set show create modal to false. And I want to verify that like this headless UI thing with the dialogue, if I pass open false here, does that just not show up to my page? And it looks like that's correct. So yeah, I'm sorry, I'm jumping around, but again, this is like a live coding session. I'm just trying to give you the stream of consciousness of how I typically work. And we are just going to basically add that back in. I don't know why I removed it to begin with. But the idea was like when you click on this thing, when you click on cancel, it should have hidden this, right? And I think I have it hard-coded to something else. Like, why is this not hiding? So let's make sure this is actually working. I'm going to put a console log here. Obviously, there's something I'm just misunderstanding about how headless UI works, but I'm clicking this button and it's not doing anything. And I don't know why. On click, on close, on close. So we have the modal here. We're passing an onClose method, which is supposed to call this method when you click it. And this is going to be passed down onClose here and also here. So when you click on this button cancel, it should have closed this thing, which it's not for some reason. I'm so confused why this is not working. It's going to be the most basic error though. I guarantee you. Probably importing the wrong modal. All right. Go create. This is set to true by default. And when someone closes it, for some reason, this isn't even getting evoked when I close it. So that's kind of a red flag. Like, we are here. Is this thing even being evoked? Maybe I can't even click the buttons. What about this one? On click, console.log, create room. Yeah, I can't even like do anything with these buttons. It's so strange. Oh, I'm an idiot. Okay, so I made this custom button component because I was trying to be cool, but I don't think I even allowed it to pass in an on-click method. How dumb was that? Like, this thing I wasn't passing through the on-click function. So obviously it's not going to work, right? But now we're getting some type of function call. Yikes. Okay, well, you know what? Sometimes when you're coding, you make really dumb mistakes, and sometimes you never learn from those mistakes. I think this is a situation where I probably won't learn from that mistake. But yeah, let's go ahead and make sure this closes. There we go. All right, I hope you guys had some fun watching me debug that. So we got a button called create room. And when you create the room, when you click on that button, we probably want to say on click, handle show create room modal. Now, one thing I'll show is like my convention is I like to have these handle functions and I like to put them all at the top of my function. Like I don't like to do inline anything in my React components. I try to keep my React components as like dumb as possible and put all the logic up here and the callback functions up here. That's just my preference. I'm not saying that's the best way to do it, but when you click on that button, it should call this function and it should open the modal. It should show it. So let's verify this works. We're good. It's working. I'm going to default this to false so it doesn't show up when the page loads. Now, the second thing I want to do is this cancel button. Like we have two primary cancel buttons. It looks pretty bad. One of them should probably be gray, right? So I'm going to go back to that button. And one thing you can do is you can add like a variant. And this could be a potential an enum, right? So if you know anything about TypeScript, there's enums. And I could say variant enum like this. And I'm just going to say primary and secondary. And this variant thing is a variant. And basically what we can do is we can say like if variant, actually I'm going to do a different approach. I'm going to do a map. So I'm going to go ahead and say like variant of primary. And what we're trying to do here, class, I'll say like variant colors is equal to this. Okay, and I'm just going to go ahead and pull out these colors here like this. And variant secondary, I'm just going to make it gray of, I don't know what it should be, but we'll figure it out. And we are just going to basically apply that string based on the variant that they put in. So I'm going to do some string interpolation here. You can also bring in like the class names library, which makes stuff a little bit cleaner. But I'm just going to go ahead and just try to do like whatever variant that they passed in for an argument. That's the style that we're going to apply to the button. Hopefully that wasn't super confusing. It might have been, but now when we go back to the UI, variant is required. So it's going to fail everywhere because we need to actually apply a variant here. And I'm going to go ahead and export that enum so we can use it in different files. But there's like 101 ways you can like make these custom component libraries and design systems. This is just one way. There's probably other ways. But let's just go and try to find any of these buttons and just add primary or secondary based on what they're supposed to do. All right, so we got some buttons there. Pretty cool. We got a button here. Should probably add a variant of primary to that. And I guess on the index, there's some buttons there. So pages index. Oh, we already added there. All right, so let's see. If we go back to here, type in Bob. We got create room. We got a cancel button. Styling kind of sucks, but hey, it's good enough. So we need to put an input box here so that they can type in what they want their room to be named. Okay, so let's go back to the modal. And for right now, I'm just going to go ahead and say like const room name and set room name. So we need some state. I'll say use state, and we're going to keep track of what the user typed in. This could be a string type as well. Make sure you type your stuff in TypeScript. And I know I have errors everywhere, but I just don't want to focus on it right now. Okay, I'm just going to ignore them. I'm going to pretend like those errors don't even exist. But inside of the panel, underneath the title and above the buttons, let's set an input box. And let's just go ahead and say on change, handle on room name change. How about that? And let's see, using my memory, can I remember what the actual like React thing was? I probably can't, but luckily we already did this on the login page. So I'm gonna go to the login page and we have a handle submit and set username. So I'm gonna go ahead and take this whole thing and copy it here. And what we could do is we could say set room name is e.target.value. There we have it. So this one, placeholder, could probably be like room name, your room name. And when you click on create, we go ahead and move this to like a different line. And I'm going to make this a function called like handle create room. This should probably have a function here, which is going to call like on create room. And we're going to pass in that room name. Okay, I want my modals to be dumb. Like all it does is keep track of what the user typed in, and then it bubbles up and calls a different function that was passed in. And I'm going to rename this modal to something else, such as like create room modal, because all of this code is very specific to creating a room. We can kind of abstract this more in the future if we wanted to, but I'm just trying to keep this really simple. So let's go back and rename this whole modal file to create room modal. And I'm going to say create room modal here and just go ahead and make sure I fix that name like that. And this thing is complaining because it does need an on create room. Okay, so when someone calls this, I'm going to say handle create room, which is going to invoke a function, which is going to take in a room name as a string. Okay. So are you all still with me? Did I just lose you all? So we should have the ability to type something in here, click on create room, and that should bubble up and call this function. Let's just go ahead and make sure this thing is calling it room name like this. I'm gonna go ahead and click create room, and we did get back whatever we typed in. So I'll say hello world. I did mess up the styling, so we should probably go back to that modal, and I'll go ahead and just go down to that create modal, and I'm gonna go ahead and just put, what am I doing? I think by default, this thing must have some type of like flex box. So I'm going to group these buttons into their own wrapper, their own div, so that they're on the same line. And I'm going to go ahead and just say like gap of pin. Will that work? No. Okay. I'll just add some flex and flex columns so they're all like in the same column, and just add some padding or some gap. And for these buttons as well, like they're pretty big, but we could probably put some flex and gap of 4 there, so they're spaced out a little bit. And I don't know what the best design is. Should the cancel button be on the right or the left? So modal UX design web pages. Let's go and look at some images real quick. And it looks like cancel is on the left on that one. It's on the right on that one. Modal with cancel button. How about that? I need to be more specific because Google's just give me whatever results back. You know, you can also just look at like material UI design modal. How do they do it? How do other applications do it? That's some of the best way you can learn good UX is just follow how like the companies with tons of money can do stuff. Why is there no cancel here though? You know what? I'm just getting caught up in something that's not really even important. This is not important, but what we want to do is when you click on create room, we want to probably clear out this input because I think this modal might store the state somewhere. So handle create room, we probably want to set the room name back to an empty thing after it's called on create room. So let's just go ahead and say like hello world, click create room. And then we also want to close the modal. So I'll just say like on close. Now, should the modal be responsible for closing, or should the top level component be responsible? I don't really know, but now it's closed and we cleared it out. Looks better. So we need to, in the higher level component, we need to keep track of like what do we do when someone tries to create a room? Well, we need to call a TRPC endpoint. And now we're finally back to that endpoint that we created, which I think was in the server router called create room. And let's go ahead and create the room. I know it took us a while to get here, but let's just go ahead and say create room is equal to trpc.useMutation. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it the server create room like so. And if you remember, this thing has a mutate async method. So I can say like async create room dot mutate async. I could pass it some data. And the data we want to pass it would be name, would be room name, and server ID, which, do we have the server ID? We don't really have a server ID yet. We probably need to keep track of what server the user has clicked on. Right now, I'm just going to hard code it. Like we should have a server here. If I logged in as Bob, this is the ID. So like, let's just go ahead and hard code it to that. And I'll put a comment to say undo the hard coding. But now when they click on create room, it should create the room, and we want to make that room show up in our dashboard. So that's kind of the next step. Let's go ahead and try that. I'm going to say create room. I'll say like general chat room, click create room. And if I go to Prisma Studio and go ahead and go to my rooms, we have a room now that says general chat room. Cool. So again, let's add another endpoint so that the front end can get all the rooms from the back end. We know how to do that because we did it with these servers. So let's go ahead and go back to clean slate. Let's close everything. I'm going to go to router. I'm going to go to server router. Now we can add a query here. I can say .query, and I could say get rooms. And that could take in an object that has some input and async resolve. You might ask, like, is this really how we do it? Like, do we have to put all these methods on the same file? No, you can split them out into other files if you want, if that's more maintainable for you. But again, sometimes like the quickest thing to do is just like group all of your things that are related to the same router so that you have like one single file you can go into and find the functions you need. And also when you do that, it kind of messes with your TypeScript inference if you kind of move stuff around. So just keep that in mind. So, but anyway, we're trying to get all the rooms that are in the server. And really all we need is the server ID, right? So I'm going to go ahead and change this to a find mini, change this to a where, and we should be good to go, right? We just need to get the rooms here and return that back to the user. So we just created an endpoint, super easy to do. Let's go back to that dashboard. I'll let you read this code for a second if you want to, but basically you just made a query called get rooms. It just does a rooms.find mini and finds every room that's part of the server. Okay, so we have hard-coded server here, but how do we actually get all of the rooms that are in that server? Well, we can do another get rooms trpc.useQuery. I'm going to say server.getRooms. And again, we need to pass out a server ID, which we hard-coded, which I'm going to go ahead and just pull out here for right now. Super hacky, but we are going to refactor this when we find the time to. Okay, so this thing, make sure I put the actual thing inside the brackets here. So now we have the ability to get all the rooms, right? So getrooms.data should have the rooms, and we should be able to go down to the bottom. Remember we have that panel, that gray panel, and we have a create room button. We could probably just map over those. So get rooms data, and then I can map over it. And I'll do a div. And let's make sure this looks good. So first of all, this thing needs a key, so I'll say room.id. And then secondly, we could just say room.name. All right. So general chat room is showing up now. And one thing I do want to show is I'll just make another one called like hello world. And I'll make another one called like GG. Notice that those rooms aren't showing up. So like, why are they not loading? Well, we have to tell the TRPC React query to basically refetch those. One thing I didn't mention, which I'm kind of regretting now, is TRPC is just using the React query behind the scenes, right? So it just has the same methods as use mutation and use query, just with a little bit of overhead to allow it to hook in directly to your TRPC routers and stuff like that. So how do you tell this query to refetch all the rooms? Well, there is a method called refetch. Imagine that. So after you create the room, you could say await create room refetch. That's it. Is it the most efficient thing? Probably not, because it's actually going to fetch back every room in the server. So as I create rooms, hello, notice that they automatically come back from the backend and those get added to our list. All right. There we have it. So we have servers, which we haven't really set up with how do you like invite people to your server, and we have rooms. It would be cool if we can click on a room and then that will take us to a chat room where you can actually talk with people. All right, so this is where we're going to get into the Agora stuff, which is going to be pretty fun, but a little bit complex if we haven't already gotten to that complexity part. So we are going to try to create a new modal slash, I guess, a new component to connect to the Agora SDK and create a token and use a token server. So pay attention, this is going to get fun here. All right, so let's go ahead and make another component. One thing you can do is, like, I think people do like a features approach or something, where inside their components folder, or they'll have like a features folder where they'll have like the name. So I'll put like dashboard here, or dashboard or whatever. And every component that's specific to the dashboard would be put here. So technically, like create room modal, that's very specific to the dashboard. I might move it there and like save it and see if it loads still. Okay, I mean, it looks okay. And then inside the dashboard, we can make something called a chat panel.tsx. So this might take some extra thinking and overhead to figure out. But what we want to do is when someone clicks on one of these rooms, we want to show this chat panel and have it connect to an Agora chat room channel, basically. So let's go to the dashboard and let's go ahead and try to show that panel here. So let's make another div here. I'm going to say chat panel. And I'm going to give this, again, some hard-coded width. We could give this like 96. How about that? Give this 50. So let's look at it. We got a chat panel here. In fact, we could probably just not give it a width at all. We could just say like flex grow, I think, and that should take up the full width of the entire container. And let's just go ahead and try to create a way to click on these rooms here. Like these are technically going to be links. So you click on them and they're going to connect you to different chat rooms. So let's go over here. This is a div, but we are going to basically convert it to a button. So it's semantically correct. And that messed up the styling for all that stuff. Let's go ahead and also make sure that this whole thing is wrapped with a flex column. And one thing you'll notice is that I'm mixing my double quotes with my single quotes. Typically, I would have ESLint set up. I forgot to set up for this project, but there we go. How do you align these things left? I forgot how to do that in Tailwind. So Tailwind docs left align text. Text left is how you align it left. So I think there's probably something else going on with my buttons, which I probably need to say like justify left. Justify start. How about that? Is that going to fix it? Okay, why are these things all centered? It's like the button is taking the full width of the parent container for some reason. I'm not sure why. I mean, really, I guess it's not that big of a deal. Like, don't get too caught up in styling. Like, functionality is the hard part, in my opinion. Styling is the tedious part. So you don't want to waste a bunch of time trying to fix styling. But at the same time, this is bothering me a lot. So let's try to figure out, is there a way to just like give this display of block, inline block? Nope. But I think the flex is causing it to like grow. I mean, we could probably fix it by wrapping this thing in another div. Not sure if that's really what we want, but it might be a quick little fix until I can figure out exactly what we want. But I mean, that works. It's not the best. I'd rather not have to wrap it in a div, but it's kind of strange. But anyway, yeah, we got the buttons here. Let's just add some like padding between them. So I'm gonna go like gap of 4 just to space it out. That's too much. I'll do gap of 2. And I'm gonna move the key to the div so we stop getting errors. Go ahead and kind of style that a little bit better. Oops. And then the button, like this thing probably should have some like margin bottom of 2, so the button's not so close. Or 4. All right, so the idea is like as you hover over these buttons, we could just change the text of them because right now it's like there's no user feedback. So I'm gonna say like hover text could be blue 400 there. So hover over those, the text turns blue. And when you click on them, we need to keep track of what room you're actually selected, okay? So we should probably have some state here. I'm gonna say const selected room is equal to use state. Set that to a string, and probably this needs to be an array of set selected room as well. And when you click on one of these room buttons, we could probably call a method called like onClick handle room selected. Then go ahead and just do that here. And this would probably take in a room name with a string, or maybe a room ID might be better, room ID. And we are going to be setting the selected room here like so. Okay, so when they click on that, it's going to pass in the room ID. So in order to do that, we do have to do an anonymous function, and I'm going to pass it room ID right here. And now when we click on this, that'll set the selected room in state. And we could pass that selected room to our chat panel. So I'm going to go ahead and just pass it selected room like this and go to my chat panel and allow that to be passed in as a prop. And I know people are going to get mad if I don't fix these types. So I'm going to say type props is equal to this. Selected room is a string. And this could be a functional component with props. Go ahead and auto import that. All right, so I just want to display the room so we know this is like working. So I'm just going to go ahead and say like there. That makes sense? So we have a chat panel. All it does is it displays the selected room, and that thing is rendered out here, which in our case, it could potentially be undefined, maybe. So I think we might need to go and say like undefined, so it doesn't complain. So as we click on these rooms, notice that the room ID that we have selected actually shows up. So the idea is that when this app loads, we probably shouldn't show the chat panel unless they have an actual like selected room. So I should probably say if there is no selected room, return. You know, I never know if you're supposed to return null or a fragment. I think you could just, if I refresh the page, it doesn't show it. Click on it, it shows it now. All right. So for the Agora thing, for the Agora integration, there's a couple things we have to kind of do, and this is going to get pretty crazy. So I do have some like other code that I'm going to reference and maybe just try to like pull in from that. But the first thing you have to do is you have to go to Agora and you have to make a new project, right? I already created one called Community Chat, which has an app ID. And if I go to config, you get a app certificate as well. Okay, so we're going to use that app ID and app certificate, which I think we're going to have to just put it into our .env file. So I'm going to go ahead and say .env, which is here. And I'm going to say Agora ID is equal to this. I believe there's a certificate ID. Agora cert is that. We're going to use that later. Anytime you change your .env files, I think you might have to restart your server. Let's just do that just in case so I don't forget. But now we should have access to those two things inside of our application. Now, I don't know if we might need to also make these publicly available. I think with the Agora ID, that might need to be publicly available. So I'm going to say next public Agora ID and just get it kind of set up there just in case we do need it. I don't remember at this point, but so the first thing is in order to connect and generate new chat rooms on Agora, you have to kind of create your own token server, right? You can go here and you can create a token and let like Agora create it for you. It expires after 24 hours. But I'm actually going to go and figure out how to create an Agora token server in Node. Now they do have a library that kind of already does this called Agora Access Token. So I'm going to go ahead and just npm install that like so. And go ahead and do that. And what we want to do is we're going to read through this guy's code and try to figure out how to do it. I've done it in the past. I just need to refresh my memory. In fact, there's an actual like YouTube tutorial, and I think they actually like show you how to do it. If I just go to Agora Access Token, they probably tell me exactly right here. All right, here we go. So no need to like read a blog post. I could just basically import all this stuff and set up the access token. All right, so again, the idea of the access token is you need a token to be able to send messages to a channel. So we're going to use the access token to authenticate the user and give them 24-hour access for these chat rooms. So hopefully this is pretty easy, but let's make a new mutation for the server router. And I'm going to go ahead and say like mutation. Actually, do we want to do a query here or mutation? I think we could probably just do a mutation. I don't know if it really matters. I'm going to go ahead and say create token. And this is going to take in an object that's going to do some stuff. So I'm going to have to import this like Agora stuff as well. We don't want RTC. Don't confuse RTC with RTM. It's two separate things. RTC is for like the live chat. Import from this. All right. So create token. We want to probably bring in some stuff like this. And actually, I'm gonna make a mutation called join room. Okay, and that's gonna take in a server ID. No, that's gonna take in a room ID, and that's gonna take in a user ID, because you have to like have the user ID to associate the token with. Okay, so if you want to join the room, we're going to generate a token for you, which we didn't declare, but this is how we're going to work towards. We're going to work backwards to generating this token, and we're going to figure this out. Okay, so going back to their examples, they basically say you can do something like this. Now they only give RTC examples for some reason. I wish they gave you some RTM. If I go to their actual repo, hopefully they have an RTM token builder example. Looks like they do. So I'm going to copy all this code. Okay, maybe not all the code. Let me just do this. And I'm going to paste it in here. Remember, app ID was already defined. So I'm going to say process.env.agora ID. And this is process.env.agora cert. For the account, this could be the user ID that was passed in for input. So I'm going to say input.user_ID. We want to expire after 24 hours. Current timestamp stuff we keep. This stuff you all have to keep. App ID. I think this is potentially undefined, so I'm just going to go ahead and do this. For RMTM role, I believe you could just do something like this. I just want to put these on new lines real quick, like that, so it's a little bit easier to read for us. I need to set up ESLint. All right, so if I set this up correctly, which I highly doubt I did correctly the first time, I hope I did, we should be able to get a token for that user who joined the room. We might come back later and add like another way to track who is in the room, but let's just focus on this first. So we got a mutation we can call from the front end to join the room. And we want to go back to the dashboard so that when you try to join the room, which is this handle room selected, we want to tell the chat panel to join the room. We could do it here, I guess. But I kind of want to have all the state be managed by the chat panel and just use an effect. I don't know if this is the best approach, but this is the approach we're going to take. So I'm going to say use effect. And I'm going to go ahead and just when this component mounts. In fact, actually, I'm going to say when selected room changes, we are going to basically try to rejoin a new room. So in order to hit that endpoint, I do need to bring in TRPC. I'm going to say join room is equal to TRPC dot use mutation dot server dot join room. And remember to call this method, we actually need to do a couple things. We need to say dot mutate async, and we need to pass it the room ID, which is selected room, and then also the user ID, which we have that inside a use state hook. So if I were to go back to where that's, or sorry, use state context, a use context, user context. I don't know what I'm saying at this point. Let's auto import that. Let's go ahead and import the use context, and we should be able to get the ID directly from context there if they're logged in correctly. I'm gonna go ahead and say if selected room is not defined, we probably just want to do nothing. In fact, let me just go ahead and do this. I'll just, if there is a selected room, we're going to call the mutate async. Now, the thing with use effects is you can't really call like asynchronous things. So I have to make a new function called like handle do join room. I don't really know what we should call this. I'll just say like connect the room or something. And we're going to basically call this thing here. And I'll just call it down here, connect the room. All right, so since we are trying to do a mutate async, we should await on that to get the token back. And then we probably want to store this token in state because we're going to need it to send off further requests. I'm going to say const, actually, I don't know if we even need the token right now because I think we're going to do a lot more stuff to connect. So the first thing I just want to do is like, does this work? I'm going to print out the token real quick and I want to see if when I click on a room, does it hit this mutation and do we get a token? And hopefully if we set this all up correctly, we should get back something. So I'm going to go to console. I'm going to click on hello. Actually, let me refresh the API. All right, so we are getting back a token. So hopefully this is good. We can use this connect to the Agora 8 RTM server. Let's look further at their docs. So to send messages with Agora, you can set up an Agora RTM client, I believe. If I click on this, let's see if they give some examples with Node. I don't think I have the Node API set up real quick. Do I have the Node? I think it actually be easier if I just look at some code that I've done. I'll be honest with you, I kind of worked on a little bit of Agora stuff for sending messages, and if I go to my repos, like why not just use some of the Agora stuff I've done? So if I go to Agora RTM React, there's already some code here that kind of shows us how to do this. So it's self-documenting your own code and using your own code is probably the first step that you should do, because it's going to be easier for you to understand your own code than it is to read some docs sometimes. But overall, like I think we can basically bring in the Agora RTM. So I'm gonna go ahead and install this SDK, Agora RTM SDK. This is what you need to kind of connect to Agora. I'll just go ahead and run that. And I'll run my dev server. Now this is a little bit more tricky in Next because Next, you can't just import this at the top of your file. You have to do like a lazy load of it. So we're gonna try to figure that out. I think we have to like import this. I forget how to do this, but Basically, what we could do is I'm going to go ahead and just try to import this directly, like so. I think we can do something like this. You know what? Let me go ahead and just go to, I have another example of where I did this. There's no shame in looking at your own code, right? So how did I do this before? Basically, there is I think there's like a chat panel or something. And this was like the code I was kind of using just to make sure I didn't go off the rails with this little tutorial. But there should be, oh, I'm using a use messages thing. Okay, here it is. This is what I wanted to kind of do. So in Next, you can dynamically import libraries and stuff with this approach. And we have to do this because Next will server-side render your components and try to bring in the Agora SDK, and it'll crash because it's trying to access Window. And Window doesn't exist on Next when you're doing server-side rendering. So you kind of have to do this workaround instead of importing at the top. But once you've done that, I mean, you can actually like generate the token. And then I can say Agora RTM, I think there's like a create instance. In this case, yeah, create instance, and you pass it the app ID. So I'm gonna go ahead and say like process.env.agora ID, and this will be the client, I believe. And since we're in the effect, this has to be next public, I believe. Once you have the client though, you can actually start doing some stuff with that. So I'll say client.create channel, and I can name the channel. So in this case, our channel ID is going to be the room. So I'm going to go ahead and just say selected room, like so. I'll make a channel like this. And I believe we might also need to pass this like a token. Actually, I don't remember where the token comes in. Client login. Okay, so make sure you always do a wait on all this stuff. I believe some of this stuff might. Yeah. But make sure you log in, and you can pass it the user ID, which in this case would be user.id, and then the token we have from the backend. Okay. So once you logged in, you can actually, I believe, create a channel. I might have to do a wait on this. Let me just go ahead and do. I apologize, y'all. I'm just going to copy and paste code because I've already put in a lot of work trying to figure this stuff out, and I think it's just easier if I just copy it in and then explain to all. All right, so let me kind of explain what's going on here. So we create the Agora client. We log in with that token that we created from the backend mutation that we kind of talked about. We specify the user ID we want to use, which is going to be that unique ID, that whatever, you log in as Bob, you get like a unique ID. And then once you've logged in, you can then create a channel, which is basically like a client-side connection to whatever chat room that we want. So in our case, we're going to pass it the selected room ID, and then we're going to join it. And then we listen for any messages. And once we get a message, we can do stuff with it, which in this case, I am not going to, we don't need to do all this stuff yet. Let's just delete some of the stuff. But we do need to put like a to-do here. Track the messages. All right. And once you've connected to the room, I think I have a syntax error somewhere. Connect to room. If I don't have a selected room, I might just return here and just keep this a little bit easier to read. All right, there we go. So all of this, when the component mounts in selected room changes, we're going to reconnect to a different channel. Okay. Maybe some of the stuff could have been pulled out and cached, but I think it's okay to just like, you have to create a new token for the new room that you're trying to join with your user ID and whatnot. And then once you've connected to the room, by the way, I do think there's some cleanup you have to do in the use effect. So like you have to call like client leave and stuff. So let's just go ahead and return the client in the channel here. So return the client in the channel. And then on the cleanup, I know I'm kind of just like copying all this stuff, but because you're using a React 18 strict mode, like you have to kind of make sure you do this stuff to clean it up. And yeah, so when this component unmounts or leaves, we leave the channel and we log out of the client. That makes sense, hopefully. So let's just see if we were to go and click on a room, like what happens here? If I click on Hello World, what happens? Not a valid user ID. Okay, yeah, so this is not working because like we don't have a user logged in. So I think what we should actually do for the dashboard is I need to go back and redirect the user to a page if they don't have that in context. So I'm going to say if user is not defined, I'm going to say router.push and just push them back to the main page. I'm going to say const router is equal to use router. Does that make sense? So like if there is no user, I guess I should check the user ID because sometimes that could be null, I believe. We go back to here. So click on Bob, click on Hello World. Okay, we're successfully connected to Agora. Notice that we have connected and everything worked out pretty good. Now what we're going to do is we're going to basically allow the user to type into an input box and send a message so that other users can also see that message. So let's go back to the chat panel. And I know this code is starting to get really complex. So at some point you just have to stop and like refactor code, but I just want to kind of get through this prototype and like get everything working going. So as messages come in, there's two things we need to do. When messages come in, we need to display them. And when you send messages, you have to like have a text area. So let's work on the text box. I'm going to say text area. I'll just do like input and I'll do a button. And I forgot we have the primary button that we can call. Send. Oh, I'm missing variant. So let's make sure we pass in variant here. That could be a variant dot primary. I think we called it like that. Okay, so we got a primary button that says send. And then also we have some input here, which we could again just do like an on change. And I'll say handle chat typed. Something like that. Placeholder, type a message. So we want to, at the top, we want to make some state, call it text and like set text equals to state. That could take in a string. And we want to basically just make a method that's going to handle when someone types into this. Again, like this is react dot. Ugh, I always forget what this is. I don't know why I can't remember this. Pages index. Yeah, it's probably this one. Let's go ahead and make sure that's typed in correctly. I'm going to say set text is equal to e.target.value. Now, one thing I think I've been forgetting to put on all my inputs is like, typically you want the value to be equal to this. And I don't know if I did that on the modal. Yeah, I didn't do that on the modal. Like, I'm not sure why I forgot to do that stuff. You should be putting values on your inputs. Like even on the pages, the login page. Yeah, I didn't even put a value here. Like, what am I doing? Okay. I kind of got distracted. I want to go back and clean up some code. But yeah, we have a chat panel now, hopefully. Login as Bob, and I'm getting some uncontrolled warnings. I'm gonna click on like hello world. And now we get that message here. We can actually type in like a message and send it. So if I say what is up and click send, we actually need to implement a function to like handle that. So I'm gonna go ahead and add an on click, and I'm gonna say handle send message. Go ahead and scroll back up to the top. The const handle send message is going to be a function that is going to send off a message. So right now, we need access to the channel, right? To be able to send a message, we have to know where the channel is. And what you could potentially do is you can either use state or a ref, I believe, where we could set the channel on state and then we can call it here. Or we could use a ref. I'm not sure what the best approach is. We could try using state first. I'm gonna say const room channel and set room channel is equal to use state. That's going to take in a RTM channel type. And we could just basically say if there is no room channel, return. Otherwise, we're going to say room channel.send message. And I believe you can pass it some text, and I can say like, I should just pass it whatever text was in that text input. Okay. But the second thing we need to do is like when we're setting all this stuff up, we just need to make sure we store that on state somewhere. And we probably want to also delete it from state as well. Now I might need to use a use effect instead of state. I'm not really sure, but yeah, I guess text can be undefined as well. So I'm gonna say if not text, return. Like don't send a message if there's no text. All right, let's just test this out. I'm gonna type in like hello, and hopefully this will send a message. It's not sending anything, so let's go back here and make sure we have this all hooked up. So on click, handle send message. I'm gonna go ahead and just print out room channel and text. I'm guessing room channel is not defined because the component has it remounted. So I'm gonna go ahead and click on like a different room. I'll say like hello, general chat. And I'll click hello. And that should have sent off a hello message to the chat room. So anyone else who's in the server should also see that message. So now for the fun part, let's go ahead and keep track of all the messages. So I'm gonna make another state called messages and set messages is equal to use state. I'm not sure what we want to call it yet, but I'm just gonna give it any. Forgive me for you TypeScript fanatics who are gonna yell at me for using any keyword, but I'll come back and fix some of this stuff. But we want to basically keep track of all the messages, which we can do. When we get a new message coming in, we could basically say set message, or set messages could be previous messages, and I'm going to go ahead and just return an array of previous messages, followed by, I'll do like text could be message.text, and user ID could be message dot. Actually, this could be peer ID. I'm going to default this to an empty array as well, like so. All right, so as new messages come in, we are going to basically push them onto an array, and we just need to display those messages too. So hopefully we can do that, where down here somewhere, where we render out the input, probably above it, like we could just say messages.map, and I'll do the message, and for every message, we're gonna render out a div like so. And for right now, I'll say message.text. This probably also needs a key, which in our case, I'm just going to do the index. Probably not the best, but we don't have like a unique identifier for the message that came in. So if I do that, hopefully, I'm gonna close some of this stuff. We can log in. What room are we in? It'd probably be cool to like actually display what room we're on. Because that's the actual the room ID, but we don't know the room name is. So we should probably keep track of when you click on these things and maybe even show like we're in general chat, but we'll do that in a second. So click on Hello World and I'm gonna go ahead and say like hi. And I'm gonna load up a new tab and hopefully this works. No router instance, you should only use next router. So I don't know. Did I load in the, oh, I was bringing in TRPC router. Use router should come from next router. Okay. Try it again. No router instance found. You should only use next router. I am using next router. I don't know why that's complaining, but am I importing the wrong thing? Let me just go ahead and like auto import this from next router. I must be doing something wrong. Well, I guess we could try to figure that out later. I'm not sure why it's saying no router instance found. I might have to do like a hard reset of my server. Maybe I should just do that. Like, I don't know what's going on. Let me just restart. Sometimes you just gotta restart your next app because you broke something. And now, I'm pretty sure I'm using next router here. So like, why is it complaining about the dashboard? This is the correct import. I mean, we could try to figure this out later. I could just go to the dashboard for both of these and I'm gonna say Bob for one and go to Hello World. And I'm gonna go Jane for the other one and go to Hello World as well. And for Bob, I'm gonna type in like, what is up? Click send. And we get that message over here in Jane's. So there's a lot of cleanup we can do, but like we're actually sending messages from one to the other. And after we send a message, we should probably clear out the state. So handle send message. We probably should say set text and just set it back to empty string, right? So as you're typing in, it clears out the messages. Another thing is you don't get messages for your own messages. So like as you send a message, you don't get that message back. So it would make sense that when you do send the message here, we should probably also like do that whole set messages flow. And I'll just put this here for right now, but the text would be the text that was actually set on the form. And then user ID would be user.id. Okay, so now you can actually like get those messages as you type them. So hello, I'm Bob. Then over here, you can send those messages as well as that user. All right, my laptop was about to die, so I had to plug it in. So that means I'm using my normal webcam and not my phone. That's why it's a different camera angle, but let's just keep going with this. So there's a lot of things that we could continuously clean up about this project. And let's just keep on adding features. First of all, the chat panel would be cool if it actually displayed which room we have selected. Right now it's displaying like the room ID, which is kind of strange. So let's go to the chat panel. And selected room is kind of named poorly. I think this should be like selected room ID. So I think we should probably rename this to selected room ID. And I also don't know why I did that. Let's do this. Anywhere that we have selected room, we should change that to room ID. All right, save that. And what else do we need to do? This should probably also take in the selected room name so it's more explicit. Again, that could be a string. And let's go back to, you know what I want to do? I want to get rid of the undefines here. Like I want to force it to be defined because I think that'll make my component a little bit cleaner. So I don't know if that changes much throughout my entire code base. Like this one, we know it's going to be defined, so we don't need to return early. But what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the dashboard because I think this is going to have an error. Down here, well, this needs to actually have like the selected room name and the ID here. And again, like wherever we have selected room, like this should probably be selected room ID. So I'll do that. Do this. And I'm just going to say, do not display this. So if selected room ID and selected room name, then we can display the chat panel. Right, so let's just make it so the component doesn't have to do like that weird stuff. Now we don't have a selected room name, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make another one called selected room name here. And we basically want to make sure we set that when the room has been selected, handle room selected. So in the code base where we call handle room selected, let's just have this take in the actual room instead of the room ID. And I'm going to go back up here and that's going to take in a room from Prisma client. And this could be room.id and this could be room.name. Now I probably could have just made one state variable that had the room on it. It probably would have been easier. But let's just keep on going forward with what we got. And yeah. So the whole reason we did that is so in the chat panel, we can actually display the selected room in the top instead of the selected room ID. So we go down here. I'm going to say room : room name. And let's make sure this shows up. So if I type in Bob, click on Hello World, we know that we're in the Hello World room. Now, I wonder what the better approach would be. Maybe just say like, wait, where's that showing up? Oh, here. You are in the whatever room. But yeah, I mean, I was just kind of playing around with styling. Again, I don't like to waste too much time on styling because like I'm not a designer and I don't want to waste too much time doing that type of stuff. But the input box and the send button, like this just looks pretty bad. I think we need to fix this. And one thing I'll notice about this primary button, it's just too big. It just looks so big. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the button component and maybe return or maybe reduce the size of this to like medium text. Okay, it looks a little bit smaller. Padding top could be 1. Padding bottom could be 1 as well. So it's a little bit smaller, not as much in your face. This input here for type of message here, like we should probably go style that too. So let's go to the chat panel and find that input, which is here. Let's give it a class name. And I'm going to go ahead and say like padding of 2, text of medium, border. So it looks a little bit better. The send button looks a little squashed. I mean, we could try to figure that out later. But I think it'd be cool to actually make the text area have like a min height. So all these things, like we should probably give it some flex column and some gap of 4 so they're kind of spaced out. And the send and the input could be grouped together in one div as well. So let's just do that. Like so. And then this right here where we kind of map over everything, this could be its own div as well. So we want to make sure we kind of do that. And I'm going to go ahead and put that in a new line too because it looks kind of ugly. All right. So again, what are we trying to do? I want to give like this a max height of 52 or something. I'm just going to pick something arbitrary. But when there's no messages, it's like not showing anything. Actually, maybe we just give it a height, like just give it a height by default and maybe give it some type of like background white or something. All right, so now it actually looks like there's like a text area that you can see messages come in. And the width of that should probably be scaled down. It's pretty big, so I'm gonna say width of 32. That's way too small too. So I'll say width of 72, how about that? And that's also pretty small as well. Like, what is the max width we can do? I think we can also do like a custom thing here. Like if I want to do like 10 REM, I think you can do that. I might be wrong about that though. Oh yeah, you can. You can do a custom width, which makes it kind of nice because I could just like pick a nice width for it. Probably give it a border. It's like impossible to see where this thing is, and make it rounded. All right, so we have a nice little text chat area. Probably give it a little bit more height. At this point, I'm just playing around with like styling. So let me focus on the actual implementation now. So the messages that need to come in here. One thing you'll notice is that if I log in as Jane again and go to hello world, type in what is up, I'm not sure why that didn't send a message. Logged in too often and kicked off, reconnect and logged in. I probably, yeah, I guess I was hitting like a rate limit of that endpoint, but so for the messages that show up here, like we don't know who sent the message, right? So we should probably display that somehow. And we need to keep track of the usernames. So there's a couple things we could do. First of all, on the right, maybe we should actually show who's in the room. I think that'd be pretty cool. And I apologize. I'm like jumping all over the place. I know I said this is a live coding, but user panel. I'm gonna say users panel. So what we're trying to do here is like, I was gonna format this, but we don't even know who's in the room. So it doesn't make sense to show names unless you can actually display who's in the room. So on the right, we're gonna kind of show who's in the room. But before we actually do that, we need to track who joins the room and who leaves the room, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and inside the chat panel, I think it makes sense to do it in the chat panel. I'm not really sure. We could probably split this into more panels. And inside of one of them, I'm going to say like user panel, like so. And this is going to be a class of flex and gap of 4 or something. So we have the chat panel here and the user panel. And I'm also going to give this one a flex of grow, I think. Yeah, so I just want the chat panel to expand full, and the user panel, we're going to figure out how to style that in a second. But does it make sense what I'm trying to do? I'm trying to actually display all the users in the room. But to do that, we have to track who joined the room. Okay, so again, let's go back to Prisma and let's see if we can maybe track what room the user is in. So on the user model, I'm just going to say room, and then I'm going to put a room here. And again, like there's probably a lot of stuff we can clean up with this Prisma schema, but I want to be able to pretty much keep track of when the user switches from room A to room B to room C. We know what room they're actually in. So I'm gonna go ahead and run that migrate. So Prisma migrate. We found changes that cannot be executed. Adding the required column room ID to the user table without a default value. There are 2 rows in the table. It's not possible to execute this step. Okay. So it's complaining because, let me read this again. Step 0 added the required column room ID to user. Yep, we added that. Without a default value. I think this can be optional, right? You might not even have joined a room yet. So I think if I just put it as optional, maybe it'll work. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know what happened here, but I just like deleted. Oh, I made this one optional too. So yeah, notice I think it also added this. So we keep track of all the users in the room, and we're going to use that in a second. Track what users are in the room. And we're assuming that you can only be in one room at a time. Like if you have 3 tabs open and you're logged into the same user, I mean, like, we're not going to track that. But we've updated the schema. But now we can go to the router, the server router, and we want to basically know what users are in the room. So we could probably add a new query, right? So we've kind of done this in the past. Let's just go ahead and make a new one called get users. This is going to take in a server ID. Actually, it's going to take in a room ID. And this could be room ID. And we want to basically get all the users who are in a room. So I could potentially do a query against users. And I could find many where room ID is equal to that. Okay. There's different ways you can do it. You can query the rooms and get all the nested users in the room. I think this approach is a little bit easier. So now we have a method we can call inside the chat panel. Or in fact, we could do it in the users panel, right? We could have the users panel be in charge of fetching that data if you want to. It might make this chat panel less crazy because right now it's getting a little bit crazy, this chat panel, I'll be honest with you all. So in order to get this working, I think this thing needs to know the selected room ID, which type props selected room ID is a string. And we're going to go ahead and make this a functional component that takes in props like so. Go ahead and auto import that. And we want to have this component use the TRPC to fetch. So I'm going to say const get users in room is equal to TRPC dot use query dot let's see what methods we have access to. So I'm going to pass in an array, and we have server dot get users. Now this doesn't make sense. Maybe it should be room dot get users. So I might go back and refactor that, but let's just carry on with what we have. So we need the room ID. So let's make sure we pass that in, and we should at this point be able to display all the users who are in the room, I think. So let's make a h1 users in room. And I'm going to go ahead and just map over that. So I'm going to say get users in room data map. And we want to get the user like this. Okay. And probably wrap this whole thing in a div because we're probably going to need to style it and do some flexbox stuff. But we want to basically keep track of the user ID. Like this, we have the TypeScript that already tells us like this is a user object from Prisma. And let's just print out the user.name like this. All right, so going back to the app, this thing is still failing on this next router thing. Okay, let's go to the docs and figure this out. During pre-rendering SSR or SSG, you try to access a router method push, replace, or back, which is not supported. You can move the code to a use effect. Okay, so that's, I should have just read the docs when I was getting caught up on that as well, but basically when the chat panel, actually when the dashboard mounts, it takes some getting used to with Next, but there's some things you cannot run due to how Next does server-side rendering and pre-generation and stuff. So we have to actually do this in a effect, which I think we have an effect. No, we don't have an effect here. So it's kind of a pain, but let's just do an effect for on mount like so. And I'm going to go ahead and just say if there is no user ID, then we are going to redirect them. And I know this is Lint. Lint is complaining about not passing something like I need to pass it router, which I guess I could do that. And user.id. Although I wonder if it's really complaining about user. It's complaining about router and user. I don't like putting things sometimes because it like does an infinite loop. It just like crashes everything. But I guess this is good. If I refresh this page, it should take me back. All right, so that was the fix for the router issue. Just use an effect on mount and basically redirect the user if user ID is not set. We can log in as Bob, go to Hello World. And notice that we did a request to get users, but it did throw an error. So we can kind of look at the error here and see it did an invalid type. So I think we're sending something wrong to the backend. Expected a string received undefined. So for room ID, we're doing something wrong, which I think if you go to the chat panel, we probably aren't even passing the correct thing here, right? So this TypeScript is telling us that we didn't even pass selected room ID, and we need to do that, which I think we have access to. So we'll do this and go ahead and join this room. And do we get back anything? Server get users? Oh, of course you don't. So we're not getting data back because we don't track when users join rooms, right? So let's go back to the server router. And when you join a room, you want to basically track. So I'm going to say await context prisma dot. Oh, how can I do this? I think I could say user dot update where, and then I want to update where user ID input dot user ID. So update the user ID. Let's see if this is going to work. Sometimes you can't do stuff like this. I'm not sure why this is actually failing. So in our Prisma schema, we have a user that has an ID. So we should be able to do something. I probably need to pass a data or something. Okay, that's what's complaining about. But we just want to set the room ID to be input.room ID. That makes sense? So when you join a room, we're tracking that you've joined that room. And technically we'd have to make a method called leave room or something, but you can only be part of one room ID at a time. So it's kind of like, you know, as you join rooms, it should be attaching stuff to that room. So let's actually go over here and I'm going to log in as Jane. I'm going to click Hello World and notice that Bob did show up. So I think that's working, but Prisma user update invocation, an error occurred during query execution, timed out during execution. I'm not sure why that happened. Let me just do a full on refresh. I'm going to go Bob, go to Hello World. Huh. Connection timed out during a query execution. Prisma user update invocation. I mean, I'm not sure why it's saying it's timing out because like the error happens like instantly, right? So it's like it's not really timing out. But I guess I'm doing something wrong. So at this point, what we need to do is like I want to make sure that it's not this stuff that's causing my backend to crash. And I'm gonna go ahead and like make sure I can switch rooms, and it's definitely the update, which for some reason I don't know if I'm like that's weird. So it's definitely not this component. I think the component's fine. This Prisma context user update is the thing that's causing issues. And I'm not sure why this would be causing issues. We pass in the user ID and the room ID. All right, let's just save this real quick. Get the error to happen again. And let's look at it real quick. Timed out during query execution. That's so strange. Like, I'm gonna wrap this in a try catch. And I'm gonna go ahead and just like print out the error here so that we get more context as to what's going on. Because, I mean, I don't know why I'd be failing just to update the user. It's kind of weird. Go to Bob, click on Hello World. And is it even printing out an error? It's like working now. I don't know what's going on there. So let me get rid of the try catch again and see if it starts breaking. That's wild. I don't know why it's crashing when it's definitely not throwing errors. Maybe it's because I'm using SQLite or something? I'm just trying to see if there's like, I think it might be a SQLite issue where maybe I'm trying to update some stuff and it's taking longer than I think it should, but by using the socket timeout parameter. I think it's because like different things are trying to read from the database. And I'm also trying to write from the database or something. So I'm not sure if there's an easy fix for that. I'll try adding this. So inside the env file, like we're doing this. I'm gonna try just restarting the server. I've never ran into this issue before, so I'm hoping this will just like fix it, knock on wood, so that SQLite can like not crash when stuff happens. Okay. I think that might have fixed it. I don't really know. I'm kind of worried about that bug. It's probably because I'm using SQLite and not a real Postgres database or something. But let's click on GG. And when you change the room to GG, it should have fetched the users in the room. And there's like a little, I think there's a race condition where this component is fetching earlier than this thing. So let's see if there's a way to fix that. Because when you join the room, yeah, it's like you don't want the user panel to fetch anything until the token has fully been set. So I might change my approach to this, like handle send message. When you join the room, there's this effect that kind of fires off to get Agora connected and does all of its stuff. And this is where it's doing it. So it's like, we could do this at a higher level so that we know we got the token before we start showing the user panel. I'm just trying to think like what is the best way to do this? Or maybe the user panel should be put inside the chat panel as well. Like in the dashboard, like maybe we could, I don't like how we have to like pull this out, to be honest. Handle room create. Handle room selected. I'm gonna try to pull this out to here. I'm not a fan of what I'm about to do here, but I'm gonna pull the token out to a higher level so that the chat panel doesn't have to worry about it. I don't know if this is a good approach, but this thing will take in a token now. And we don't want these components to render until we've fully gotten that token, because there's definitely a race condition going on. So I'm gonna go ahead and set the token at a higher level and make sure join room is pulled out as well to a higher level. At some point in software, like you have to just, like I'd probably spend a whole day just rethinking and redesigning what I'm doing, because it's hard to do it on a live stream and like make sure you're writing perfect code. So why is this not, okay, so this could potentially be undefined. So this needs to be room.id, because I know it'll be defined then. Then I'm gonna call mutate async, that'll get the token. I'm gonna set the token here, which I need to make a token and set token. And we don't want to actually render out the chat panel until the token's set. So make sure all three of these things are set before you render out the chat panel. And in fact, where did I put the users panel? Did I put that at the bottom of the chat panel? I probably did, didn't I? Yeah, so again, like, as long as we just wait for the token to be fully set, like, I think we should be okay. You can tell me in chat, like, what a better approach was. What is this? Oh, it's complaining that chat panel, I need to pass in token as a string, like so. And then should have access to token here. And then every time you switch rooms, you want to basically generate a new token. Let's try that out. Let's see if I click hello world, I want to make sure that Bob shows up in every time. Was that a race condition or is it just slow? Yeah, it's still causing some issues. Now, I think what happens is there's like a batch that goes on. Join room and then get users. So it still thinks Jane is in the room, but let's keep on going. Can I reproduce this if I keep on clicking? Dang. Yeah, so it's like, I think it's fetching the users before it calls join room still, which is weird because it's like we definitely await here. Oh, okay, hold on a second. Maybe we need to like await before you set the stuff. I'm gonna do this first, get the token first, and then set the state in React, because I think React might be like re-rendering stuff as we're changing it. Let me do a hard refresh one more time. Make sure that's working out. So this is some of the stuff you deal with when you get on like larger projects and applications, like race conditions. I probably made too many requests to Agora, so it's like you gotta add edge cases and like try catches and make sure you retry and stuff. And again, this isn't a production ready thing. I'm just trying to show you like how to build something really basic. But there you have it. I mean, like if I were to go ahead and log in as Jane and click on Hello World, we can type in like, what is up? I don't like how this isn't wrapped in a form. So let's go back to the chat panel and I'm gonna go ahead and figure out how to wrap this in a form. So we have an input and a button. I would probably put this in a form and then say like on submit, handle, send message. Okay, and I'll get rid of the click handler to that. And this thing would actually take in E. Let's go look at the other page and figure out how we did it. We did it like this. So handle send message is actually called when you submit the form. And then we could just say e.tar prevent default like that. And let's see, can I press enter and send the message? I can, and it shows up for the other person. So we want to show the name of who sent the message and probably add some padding to this panel as well. So let's go and find where that panel is, which is here. And I think I could probably just give it some padding of 4. That'll push it in a little bit, make it a little bit nicer. And then also the message, I think it has something called a UID, which it's going to be pretty ugly. So we might have to figure out a way to like get the users who are in the chat room and then convert them to the names. So why is this not working? I'm gonna go to Bob, hello world, type in like what is up. I think we might have called it something else. This is why you need to like put types on the message up here. Like we're just pushing some random things which has text and user ID. So at this point, I'm gonna make this a little bit better. I'm gonna say type message is equal to text, which is a string, user ID, which is also a string. And I'm gonna type this instead of any, I'm gonna say message. So that's gonna make our code hopefully cleaner. And go down here, we have some errors where this has text of, I think this is saying this could be undefined. So like, let's just keep it as null. I'll just do an empty string. Okay. So again, let's try this up. We get the message of who sent the message, which is cool. But the issue is like, this is a super ugly ID. We need to map this ID to the users who are in the room, potentially. Or we could just keep track of the username and send that in the message. Because I think the message that you send can just be any type of string. So technically we could send JSON messages across the wire, and then the message itself could have the name of who sent it. I'm not too sure what the best approach is yet. But when we send a message, handle send message, what do we actually send across the wire? If you look down here, this is where we do the Agora send message. And is there any like additional context we could add here? Because the problem is if I just try to map this ID to the users in the room, then when Jane leaves, like the ID won't know what to map to. So it's like the message needs to actually have the real name of the user instead of this ID, in my opinion. And I think the only way we can do this is if we actually do like a JSON stringify, and we send over like the user ID, which could be user ID. We could just say the text, and username might need to be something as well, which I think we could do user.name. And I'll just go ahead and push name there too, user.name. And I'm going to go ahead and extend this to name of string. Now, when you send a message, we're sending over this JSON stringify thing. And when you receive a message, message.text is actually going to be a JSON object. So I need to actually like convert this to a message object, json.parse, go ahead and parse that message. And we could basically do a ... like that. Maybe. I guess we need to also check if this is undefined, then just return, don't do anything, because it's complaining about something. So I don't know, again, this might not be the most production ready thing, because like we should know the peer ID is really what the user ID is sending. So we don't want anyone to just spoof people's names. But again, I'm not focusing on like a production ready app. I'm just showing you how you can potentially create something, like prototype something cool. Let's try it again. So instead of displaying the user ID, I'm going to display the name. And if I send a new message, Bob shows up. Does Bob show up for Jane? It does. Cool. So you can send like JSON stringified objects across the wire. And now Bob shows up for the users. There's a lot of stuff we can work on still. Like the users in room, this could be formatted. So let's go to the users panel. And let's give this a class name of, I don't know, width of 40 rem, BG gray of 200. And that looks pretty bad. Let's do like 20 rem, 10 rem. Yeah, so there's like padding here where I think I probably need to remove the padding from the chat panel, which I'm not sure where that's coming from. Is that coming from dashboard? Where's chat panel? Yeah, this has some padding on it. Let's get rid of the padding so that the users in room is up there. And I'm going to add padding directly to the chat panel. So this could be padding of 4. Oh, it can't be padding of 4 because this one could be padding of 4, I think. And users in room is another users panel that could have some padding. Here we go. And maybe gray of 100 instead of whatever. And height of full. Oh, that's not working. So we'd have to go back to the chat panel and figure out where is the users panel. This probably needs to be H of full as well. There we go. So it looks better. Kind of. Again, right now I'm just doing some cleanup users in room to make it look a little bit more appealing. I'm not a stylist, so like, I mean, I'm not a UX person, so I don't really know, like, I think font bold is a new one we haven't done in Tailwind yet on this app that I'm working on, so we can kind of do that. And then we could probably add some gap between these. So like I could say class name is flex, and then I could say flex column, and then I could say gap of 2 or something. Then this one could be like margin bottom of 2. Okay. So we have the ability to send messages to users. Now, one thing we haven't done is like when you send a message, like the issue is if I leave this room and come back, first of all, I should have cleared out all those messages. So that's probably something we need to work on. So if we go to the chat panel, we have a use effect, and when that effect unmounts, which I believe is right here, we should probably say like set messages is equal to an empty array. And there might be some other cleanup that we need to do as well. In fact, maybe we could do it at the beginning, that room channel. I guess cleanup's fine. Let's see. As I switch rooms, it should clear it out. But I guess what I was trying to say is like, you don't have the history of the rooms, right? So if you weren't in the room when people are typing, you don't see what the history is. So we could actually keep track of messages in the room, I believe. So like I said, let's go back to Prisma and let's figure out a schema to add. So on our room, we probably need to keep track of messages. So I'm gonna say model message, and this could have messages message. I save it, it should auto add everything I need, hopefully. And this probably needs some text as well. It needs to be a string, probably the name of the user, probably the user ID might be useful as well. And we can do like a relationship between like the user and the message, but I think we could just like denormalize this stuff and not, or normalize it and just duplicate data. I think it's fine. But why is it complaining? Error validating model message. Each model must have at least one unique criteria. Okay, because we don't have an ID. So let's just add an ID here and everything should be happy. Let's just start with that. I think that should be good. So a room can have multiple messages. In fact, we probably want like a created at timestamp, so that when we fetch it back from the database, we can order it by something. So Prisma created at timestamp. I don't know how to do that, I'll be honest with you all. It looks like you might be able to do this. Let's try that. So created at will default to now. And let's do a migrate. So I'll just say Prisma migrate, and I will say track messages. Let me go ahead and run the dev. And this app's getting pretty big now. We went from a small little page with a login button to a lot of stuff going on. So at some point you reach like this super complexity of your components, and you just, I think I kind of mentioned this before, you just need to dedicate like an hour or 2 or 3 or a whole day just rethinking what you're doing, refactoring what you're doing, cleaning the code up. And again, this is a live coding, so I'm just doing the first thing that comes to mind. So it's not going to be the most efficient, it's not going to be the most productive ready, but I'm doing a rapid prototyping so that I can actually see if this thing is working, and I can kind of show this at the end of the day. If a client were to come to me and say, hey, build this for me, I could show them progress at the end of the day, and they'll be like, wow, this is actually pretty cool. So I want to track the messages when people send message. So when I send a message here, we need a way to add another mutation so someone can actually track the messages. So I'm going to go to router slash, I'm just going to hack it back onto server router. And I'm going to add another, let me just do this right. I'm going to make a new one called room router. And inside a room router, I'm going to go ahead and add a get messages query and save message mutation. Okay, those are the things we're going to need to be able to track and retrieve the messages on a historic server. And then over here, I'm going to say room. I'll say room server. Oh, room router. And get rid of that semicolon. So that should be good. Now, what we need to do is I don't know if we need to restart the server. I don't know if I did already. I probably did. But first of all, get messages. What does this method need to do? Well, when you pass in a room ID, you need to fetch all the messages in the room. So I'm going to go ahead and say like messages dot find mini. Go ahead and delete that. I'll say where room ID is equal to input.room ID. And we also want to like sort. I think there's a way to order it or something, order by. And I think we can say like created at ascending or descending. So ascending. We'll just try descending, I think. I know I shouldn't just do guessing, but we want the newest message to be at the bottom. So I think descending might make sense. And let's just go ahead and return messages here. So let's just return messages. And now we have an endpoint for getting the messages. And now for saving messages. So whenever someone sends a message to Agora, we also want to send off a message to our database just so we can track it. And again, like we need to send the text, the name of the person who sent it, the room ID, and I think there's probably something else we should probably do. But let's just go ahead and say create a message. Data could be room ID is input.room ID. Name and text. Saying message does not, okay, here we go. Is not assignable to. So what am I missing? I'm probably missing like user ID, name, text, room ID. I think I need to pass user ID as well. Input.user ID. And honestly, we could probably go without user ID. Like I guess I could pass it in. That's probably fine. All right, so when you create the message, we could return that back. And hopefully these endpoints, these mutations and queries work. So let's go back to the chat panel where we send a message. And in order to send that, we need to bring in a TRPC mutation again. Okay, so I'm going to say const send a message is equal to TRPC dot use mutation. And then I want to do room.saveMessage. Okay. And down here, after you sent the message to Agora, let's just send the message to our backend. And this is just going to take in some data. This is going to take in like room ID. In fact, I'm going to copy all this. Room ID is going to be equal to, do I have a room ID already? Selected room ID. Yes, I do. All right, so the selected room ID, the name, the user ID, and the text. I believe that's everything we need. and TypeScript would complain if we're not passing something. And we don't need to do async here because like just send it off and don't really worry about waiting for it. You probably want to do like error handling if this thing does fail, honestly. So we could just do mutate instead of mutate async, and that should do the same thing. So the idea is when this chat panel first loads, you want to fetch back all the historic messages. So I'm going to do another trpc called like get messages. I'm going to say use query. And I'm going to go ahead and say room.get messages, like so. And I believe this takes in a room ID, so I need to say selected room ID. All right, so now we have a typo. Let me delete that. So instead of putting messages here, what we could technically do, actually for right now, I'm going to keep this messages in state, and I'm going to have this actually take in another thing called on success. And when this thing is done giving us some data, like when it's done doing the query and getting the data back, we should actually have the initial messages, which I'm hoping would be an array of messages. And what we could do is we could say set messages is equal to initial messages. And I think that might work. Let's try it. I don't know. So I'm logging as Bob, and this stuff is component is changing. Let me fix that real quick. Like I think there's like some issue with the when I type into this input box. Kind of annoying me. So let's go and fix that. And I think the input has a value of username, but username is probably defaulted to null or undefined. So let's default it to an empty string. And now that error will go away. So I'll do Bob, log in. I'll click hello world. And now I'm going to type in some messages like what? I think we had the same exact issue with this. So chat panel, let's go to the input. This is coming from text, and text is also defaulted to undefined. So I'm going to default that to there. I'm going to take Bob and I go into hello world channel. And I'll type in a message like what is up, hit enter. Kicked off by remote session. I wonder why I keep getting kicked off. Maybe my hook, my use effect probably isn't working that great. So general chat, send a message, and I'll send another one called testing. And if I log in as Jane and click on general chat, notice that the messages came up for a second, but then they vanished. So we might need to figure out a way to, there's probably like some race condition where like this thing is not setting it correctly. I might need to do like previous messages and then I need to do that. Sometimes like with state, like there's race conditions, you got to make sure you do it the callback so that when you, oh yikes, that's double doing it. That I think that made it worse. So we're getting back the messages here, but for some reason it's like getting cleared out. I'm not sure why. You know, let me go to an example. I think I did do this on a project. I think I have an example component called home cat panel. Let's see if this has something we want. Use get users in room. No, use get messages. Oh, enabled false. I think this is what I want. Yes, yes. So you can pass enabled false to prevent React Query from like doing its default thing. And you can actually only fetch this. Actually, why did we do that? Let me try doing this. So we are going to disable this and set it to false, and we can say like get messages is equal to that. And I believe we can just manually invoke refetch when this use effect fires off. So we can say like refetch here. And I don't know if that returns a promise. I think it might. So let's just try refetching right here. So whenever the selected room ID changes, that's when we actually like refetch the data. Okay, that's not working how I thought it would. What is going on here? Let's take a step back. Let's just think about what's going on here. So when this selected room ID changes, React Query is going to fire off and it's going to fetch all the rooms, all the messages in the room. And we know that actually returns the right data. And when this is successful, we set the messages equal to the initial messages. But something is overriding the state. And it might just be this default thing, because the only other place we call set messages is when we get a message and we call it here on unmount. So it could be this. It could be the cleanup effect is unmounting. Like if I were to delete this and go back. Okay. I guess my cleanup was clearing it. There's still a lot I need to figure out and learn about the unmounting with React 18 strict mode. Like it's just super confusing. But it's good for catching bugs. So I think there might be like a small bug. But I'm gonna basically, I don't think I need to do a refetch, honestly. Like I could probably just not do this. Let me delete this real quick. I'm gonna get rid of enabled and I'm going to do this and see what happens. So as I switch rooms, we're gonna download the history. And I got kicked off. Jane got kicked off of the session for some reason. So I'll go ahead and join with Jane and I'll say like, what is up? Log in too often and kicked off. Yeah, so we might have to like pull this connect client, like this login thing. I'm not sure how we do this. Like the token is, I believe, scoped to the channel. Actually, maybe it's just scoped to the user. Yeah, so maybe I'm probably doing something incorrect with how I'm interfacing with Agora. I think maybe we just want to connect once you've logged in and keep that connection somewhere at higher state so that we can use it throughout our application. That might be the better approach for what I'm doing, because there's like a hard limit of how often you can log in and log out with that token. So I think what we probably want to do, I want to make sure that the token is not bound to a channel, which I don't think it is. It's just bound to like sending messages. So yeah, I think we just need to pull this out to a higher level. Hopefully I can figure this out and not spend too much time trying to figure it out. But I mean, when you go to the index and you log in and you go to the dashboard, maybe the dashboard is the thing that could do this stuff. So I think we have a use effect. Like when this thing mounts, at this point, I don't know. Like we could load in the Agora thing here, and I could basically say const to login is equal to this. The problem is that we need the token, and the token doesn't happen until here. So we probably need to get the token way before we like try to join the room. So get the token. I don't even know why we have the room ID here. Like, we don't need the room ID for joining the room. So bear with me. I'm just doing like some crazy refactoring right now because I don't think what we're doing is gonna be sustainable in the long run. So I'm gonna make another mutation called like join room. That's gonna do this like room update stuff. And then a different one called get token. Technically that could probably be a query, but let's just keep it a mutation for right now, since we have more control when we can call it with the mutation. So if I were to call get token from the dashboard somewhere, I'll say get token server.get token, and I'll say get token mutate async. That's how we can get the token back. And get token doesn't care about the room ID, so let's get rid of that. Go back to the dashboard. We have the token here, and now we can try to log in connect. So let's delete all this stuff and verify that like we're calling the connect function correctly. Client logged in. And now we need to have this client thing, and we probably need to send it to lower levels. Because in order to, I think, where do we use client? From the chat panel, we say client dot create channel. And the channel is based on the room you selected. So yeah, I think we need to basically probably return a cleanup function here. So return a function that is going to say client dot yeah, so what I'm trying to do is like, I'm gonna say a login promise, and I want to basically get the client. Let me do this. Get the client from the login promise. I think you can use async in the return function, I hope. And when you leave, I guess you should like do a client disconnect, client leave, client logout. Yeah, I don't know. I think React 18 strict mode is like screwing me over because it's like doing a bunch of reconnects and stuff, but I'm just gonna go ahead and say client logout here. And hopefully it won't do as many login and logouts. And we basically need to get this client and we need to pass it to lower variables, right? So we could potentially use state. So I'm gonna say client and set client is equal to use state. And that could be RTM client, like so. We want to make sure we set the client here. And then probably also we could, on cleanup, we could set the client to undefined. Yeah. And then what is this complaining about? I guess you can't do async await here. Like you have to actually do a normal function that's returned. So I'd have to do like const logout is all this and call logout just so I can have access to async await. This is so hacky. But yeah, I guess I'm just trying to set the client on state so that I can pass that client down into the things that need it. I could also use context as well. This thing doesn't need the token anymore because we only do it once. And the client should probably be passed into the chat panel. So we have to go into the chat panel and we probably need to have this take in an RTM client like so. This could take in a client from props. And anywhere that we have client here, like this and login And we don't need RTM anymore. Now we have access to actually create and join different channels, I believe. So, man, I hope this refactoring didn't just break everything, because that would really stink. But I guess we should also check if the client is defined and don't render the chat panel until we've fully done all that. Let's just close our eyes and log in as Bob and see what happens. So we logged in, we got our token, and now we're authenticated, and I should be able to join general chat, and nothing happens when I do that. So let's try to figure out why. I'm clicking on handle join room, I believe. Actually, I'm doing handle room selected. And that should be changing the selected room ID. This is pretty hacky. I would not recommend doing this. We should probably pull that out to like should show chat panel or something, but let's just do that. It's just too much. I'll say like const should or show chat panel is equal to this. And then I want to just go ahead and console log show chat panel. All right, there we go. So I guess the idea is like we need to know like why is it always undefined? Because at some point it should be displayed. So I want to guess that like one of these things is just like not. I'm gonna log all these things out. Token. We're not setting the token. So we get the token here. We should set the token like so. Actually, we don't even need to pass the token in, do we? Why does this thing need access to token? Yeah. So after our refactoring, like this thing doesn't need token, which means that we don't need to set token on state. Which also means we don't need to pass it anywhere. So get rid of it from that if statement, get rid of it from here. And try to log in as Bob again. Click on general chat. Client is still undefined. Why is client undefined? All right, let me just start fresh. I'm gonna go ahead and just delete the other tab. Type in Bob. And for some reason, client is getting set to undefined when this page loads. So that's what we need to look into. Why is set client undefined? Again, it's probably these cleanup methods are probably messing this up a little bit. As we call login, which is going to get the token, and then it's going to import the Agora RTM SDK. We get the client, we call login with that, we get the authenticated client. Set client. So this should be setting the client to whatever this was defined as. And then we return it. This is all going to be set to a promise. And then when we try to clean up or unmount, we are going to wait this to get the client. We call logout and we set the client as undefined. I have a feeling this is the thing that's breaking it, but it should have gone back and called this again. Crazy. While I'm at it, I mean, let's just go ahead and say like join room.mutate async, and like we could say room ID selected room ID. We might as well just do this. Like I know we need to track when you join the room. Why is this complaining again? Oh, I need the user ID too. User ID is equal to do I have a user ID? It's just user ID, right? All right, so that doesn't fix our original issue. I think if I just like delete this, like it might work, but I don't think that's the solution we're looking for, to be honest. I need to go back and really think about this. Clients defined because we didn't clean it up. I'm gonna click general chat. A channel the same channel ID or has already joined. Channel.join. Connect to room chat panel. Chat panel. Await channel join, client create channel. Okay, so like we have to. Wait, why is this doing client? Okay, so we don't want to do client logout here. Maybe that was part of the issue. Like when the room ID changes, like you don't want to. We don't care about client, I don't believe. Client.create channel, select the room ID, channel.join, do all this stuff. Set room channel. And then we can unset it, leave. You know, let me see if I can go back and set that undefined thing back, because maybe we were just clearing it somewhere else. Oh wow, did that just fix it? Kind of not. Not a valid user ID. So I guess we have to figure out why is user ID client login. So this use effect probably should only fire when user ID is defined. So if there is no user ID, return. I could just have it taken user. How about that? Let's do Bob. Click on general chat. And again, the client is not defined here. So what type of race condition are we getting here? So console.log, setting the client and unsetting the client here. Okay, well, let me go back. Log in as Bob. We get unsetting the client, setting the client. So it's setting the client twice. There's some type of like race condition going on where I probably need to like have this logout thing wait on. Yeah, this is bad. You know, I might actually just put a little promise out here because I think there's like an issue with the React strict mode. Honestly, I give up. I'm gonna turn off React strict mode. I know you're supposed to keep it on, but at the same time, like how much time do you want to spend struggling with trying to get something working? Especially like, okay, I'm gonna turn strict mode off. Actually, I think that's the wrong file. I'm gonna turn it off and see if it fixes my issue. I'm pretty sure it will. But login as Bob. Client is getting unset again. Okay, I need to restart my dev server. Make sure you restart next whenever you turn off strict mode. Okay. So I mean, I'm pretty sure the issue is with React 18 strict mode, causing it to unmount and then mount and then, you know, clean everything up. And I just have a condition that I really need to fix. But for the most part, I mean, I'm struggling with this video right at this point. Let's make sure this stuff all works. We'll say hello, log in as someone else, Jane, and we are in hello world. So I'm gonna click hello world. Jane and Bob show up, and hi Bob, how are you? That shows up over here, although it's in the wrong order. So I need to probably reverse the order of where these messages are showing up. How do I do that? So let's go to the chat panel again. And when you get a message in here, we get the previous messages and we append the current message. So this should have been added to the very, very end of the list. but I'm guessing that there's some type of... Okay, I know what the issue is. So when you're using tRPC and React Query, like, we need to actually use enabled false. Enabled is false. And we want to make sure that we only call the refetch once when this component is like mounting. So inside a connect to room, I'm just going to say like await get messages.refetch. So just fetch it once when the actual room first loads and we connect and everything, so that we don't overwrite as we change tabs. So I think that was the issue. All right, so some more issues. Your screens, these things are going off the screen. So if we go to the chat panel and we go to where the text is being displayed, which I believe is here, we could say overflow of, I think auto or hidden might hide it. So overflow of auto will put a scroll bar, and now we don't see this anymore. And there you have it. So we have all these different chat rooms, and you can kind of go in and get the history of them. One thing that'd be nice to do is, like, as the messages are changing, we can kind of force the scroll bar to go down to the bottom. I am actually just going to go, I did this in a previous video. I'll just go ahead and do like React, Agora, RTM React. Go to source, let's go to app.jsx, and let's go ahead and try to find, there's like a scroll to top, here it is. I'm gonna add that in real quick. So we want to keep track of the messages with a ref, because this whole thing's in a scroll bar. So I'm gonna go ahead and say like ref is equal to messages ref. And we want to go ahead and just like auto scroll this thing to the bottom as messages are changing. So I'm going to say const messages ref is equal to use ref. And I believe I can just say like null here. I don't know if you need to pass it null. I might not need to. Let me not pass null for right now. Some people say they don't like the null keyword, but I do believe we get some type of like random TypeScript error if you don't. Yeah. So I'm going to pass null for right now. And I'm going to put an effect on messages. Okay, I have a lot of effects going on in this file. I think I have 2 different effects. So maybe I'll group them down here. And at some point I would probably pull these out in the custom use effects. But yeah, I'm going to say if messages ref, I'm going to return possibly null. Scroll height does not exist on type never. So I'd actually have to like put this in some type of, I wasn't really sure how you can do this in TypeScript. I can go look it up, but I think, let's check this out. Like as new messages are coming in, it scrolled all the way to the bottom. So that was good. And what is up? Cool. Yeah, so we've kind of done a lot in this application. I'm not sure if there's anything else. I mean, we could try to like implement the ability to switch rooms, or maybe you can message people directly. I mean, maybe the ability to delete a room would be cool as well. Like we have all these rooms that are just sitting around, which maybe we don't want. I think there's still a race condition with like the users in the room is not being fired off at the right time. So I may have to go and figure that out as well. Yeah, I mean, I'll just add like the ability to delete a room. Maybe just put like a little trash can icon or just a little delete. Yeah, I'll put like a delete channel button down here or something, just so we can actually like do a simple CRUD method. So on the chat panel itself, we could probably just add a message here where we could add at the very bottom or the very top of this room. I'll just add a button called like delete room. And hopefully I'll make a variant danger. So I'll say like danger is, I'll say red. All right, so we should have a delete room button at the top. And let's just go ahead and, I'm not sure why it's so big. I think it's because it's like the flex box is causing it to grow. So let me just go put this in a div like so. Delete room. And if you click it, what we want to do is probably do another mutation to delete the room and all the messages in the room. So yeah, let's see if we can kind of implement that. I'll go to the rooms router and let's do a mutation called like delete room. And that could just take in a room ID. And let's just say if we can do a delete where room ID is equal to room ID. Or I think it would just be ID here. So delete where the ID. And I don't think we really need to return much here. So this should hopefully work. I don't know if we need to delete all the messages first or if it's going to do a cascade delete. But we could try to add an on click to a trpc delete. So I'll say const delete room is equal to trpc dot use mutation room dot delete room. And if I were to delete this room, which would be here, handle delete room, go back up to the top where we have some other handles, const handle delete room is a function that when you call it is going to call delete room dot mutate async. I'll wait on that, and that should hopefully delete the room. We might get some errors. It looks like we also need to pass it the room ID, like so. And after you delete the room, you might need to do set selected. Actually, you can't change the room ID, can you? Yeah, maybe we should just go back to the dashboard. Well, we're already on the dashboards when you do this, so I'm not sure how that's really gonna work. Let's just try this. I mean, like, let's go to Bob. Let's go to a room and let's try to delete the room and see what happens. And if I go here, delete that room. Yeah, I think it is working. I think I just need to make sure I refetch the chat rooms. So on the dashboard, we have, I think, get rooms, and we just need to make sure we fetch the rooms. So on the chat panel itself, like this needs access to refresh rooms. And that could just take in get rooms refetch method like this. I'll just call it refetch rooms. How about that? So let's go to the chat panel and I'm going to say refetch rooms. And this could be a function that just does a void. And we're going to make sure that when we delete the room, we want to refetch some more rooms. So let me log in as Bob again, go to hello and delete the room. And now it got deleted. And I think it probably makes sense also to not have this room selected anymore because like it's been deleted. So we may have to also pass in a set selected room ID. So just doing some prop drilling right now, and we could have that also be a function that just doesn't do anything. I guess I could take in a string. And we just want to also set the room ID to undefined or maybe the empty string. Let me make sure that's passed in here. All right, so let's go ahead and try it again. Go to GG, delete the room, and it unselected the selected room. All right, yeah, so that kind of wraps up all I wanted to do in this video. I know there's probably 10 or 20 different features I can keep on adding onto this, but at some point, I just need to stop. But I hope you guys learned some stuff. I hope you guys learned from watching me struggle along the way and try to figure out how to plan this, how to build out some basic panels and create chat rooms that we can send real messages to other users to using the Agora service. So definitely check out Agora. It's really cool. You can easily send messages and you can do live chats and video voice chats and stuff like that. And again, I'll try to have all this code hosted at this repo that I kind of talked about, and I'll put it in the description below. I'll get that committed up for you all. And if you have any suggestions, like feel free to leave a comment. If you don't like the way I did this video, let me know. Maybe I can change my structure a little bit. But again, the vibe of my channel is I like to do a lot of live coding. So I want to show my viewers like what it's like to actually code, run into bugs, fix these bugs, and just try to build out new things that you never built before, right? I've never built this application before. So there's a lot of things that I struggled with along the way, and I hope that was a good learning experience for you all. Anyway, be sure to join my Discord if you want to talk to me directly or ask other people who are trying to learn how to code questions. And like always, leave a thumbs up or a dislike if you didn't like this video, leave a comment, and be sure to subscribe and press that bell icon if you want to get more videos like this in the future that should hopefully help you become a better web developer or React developer, etc. Have a good day and happy coding.